Well, hello everyone. I'm afraid Olivari is still not here, but I'm so excited to be talking to you that I couldn't wait because I have so much to say on the subject. I actually wrote a Substack, and it basically consisted of let me see, it's actually in the description. I think it has about 43 questions about the subject, and I doubt we'll have time. No, 52 questions. I basically thought up to fill in um, the description box um, because I was so excited about the subject and and wanted to say a bit more about it. But hopefully, Alabari will arrive soon to tell us his views, because this show is about him. It's about him. You, I think, will have heard of my views ad nauseum, and you can probably repeat them in your sleep. And I don't particularly want to bore you. I just really wanted to talk to Alavari about his views on whether we should obey God's laws and whether to believe in him. And I suppose I'm just telling you my views while I'm waiting for him to come, so I don't have to tell him my views when he does arrive, because, that would distract from him telling us his views. So the title is, Should We Obey God's Laws and Believe in Him, even though we are not sure that He exists? And I think you already know my answer. I'm saying that even if you don't believe in God, the laws of God in the Quran make social, political, and moral sense, and we should obey them, even if we don't think we will be rewarded in heaven or our foes punished in hell. And for this reason, we should do it because it would make the world a better place, because if the punishment fits a crime and the laws are fair enough, then obviously we should obey them. And I know some people will say, oh, but won't we be missing out on breaking the laws of God if God doesn't exist to punish us if we break them? And my answer to that would be, we should obey them because it would have the effect of keeping our group in existence for longer than if we didn't obey them. So you can imagine a group in which its members are allowed to steal and kill and commit sexual offences all over the place. Obviously, such a society wouldn't last very long because they would be busy killing each other, and we know what happens when there are internal divisions in your country. An imperialist will pop up and take all your stuff after holding a colour revolution. This is a little disconcerting because I did actually ask Alabari earlier today. In fact, about 4 hours ago, talked to you at 6, but he's not here. So what shall I do? I could read the 52 questions that I asked on the subject and give you my answers to them. How about that? So there we are. I will ask the first question. which is, why should we obey God's laws? Because they make social, moral, and political sense. What are God's laws? That's a good question, because there are different classifications and categorizations of God's laws. Some people talk about the Ten Commandments, others talk about the Noahide laws, and others yet talk about Sharia law. And if we're going to be doing it properly, I'm saying it would have to be Sharia law, because obviously it's not enough to use just the Ten Commandments or the seven Noahide laws. And I'm saying the seven Noahide laws are there to allow rabbis to rank the four Gentile religions. So Gentile societies in need of a new religion would know which one is the most Noahide of all Gentile religions and which one is the least. Three are the Ten Commandments for Jews and the seven Noahide laws for Gentiles. Well, I know what Jews think about the subject, so I would say the Ten Commandments that include the keeping of the Sabbath is, Jews would argue, for them only, and the seven Noahide laws are for Gentiles. And this might make Christians a little annoyed, even though the seven Noahide laws actually repeat the first two of the Ten Commandments, which is the ones forbidding idolatry and blasphemy. I suppose Christians would object to the Noahide laws because they only appear in the Talmud, and the Talmud is not a document that they have much respect for, because it remains the scripture for Jews, which Gentiles reject, even though Gentile Christians have culturally appropriated the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, as the Jews might say. I'm getting a little concerned now. No sign so far of Alavari. But I'll carry on, since I did have something prepared for you earlier. So, because of the different views of the three Abrahamic faiths, is there a way of working out which of the three Abrahamic religions you ought to obey if you were minded to worship God? And I'm saying there's nothing necessarily superior about being a Jew, although from the way some Gentiles talk, they would think Jews have a higher status to Gentiles because they have been given the title God's chosen people. Which means that they have the special privilege of being chosen when Gentiles have not been chosen. But is it necessarily a good thing to be chosen if you've been chosen to have bad things happen to you? So some of you may remember your school days when it was often said that so-and-so should be made an example of, or so-and-so has been made an example of. And this usually means that you break some rule at school and you are singled out for particular punishment. It's sort of when you think everybody else has broken the rule, but they just happen to catch you and make an example of you. And you don't think it's quite fair because of all the others who got away with it. And I really do think that Jews have been chosen to be made an example of. So all the bad things that they do, I mean, I really have to be honest, and I don't think that my people. Now, who are my people? I mean, I could say people of my race, people of my nationality, people of the nationality of the place, of the country I was born in. And I don't think there are any people in the world at all who who I think would have behaved in a better way than Jews. I mean, even now with what is happening in Israel, that there are plenty of Gentiles saying, "Yeah, just kill them, kill the Gazans. Who cares? You should have moved them ages ago," or words to that effect. So there are plenty of non-Muslim Gentiles who loathe Muslims, who won't shed any tears if all the Muslims disappeared. So this um, this pretext, I think, for many people claiming to be concerned about Gazans are really, some might argue, um, people who don't like Jews throwing the corpses of Gazans at Israelis. Does it matter? One should always take into account that there are people who are genuinely concerned about these things. But I suppose I'm taking the lowest common denominator, and my memory of things in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it is this: you have this vague memory of there always being um, trouble in the Middle East, and it's something to do with Jews and Muslims, and they're always killing each other, and there are acts of terrorism and bombings and fighting and people crying, and it's been like that for, is it 70 years, 76 years, 78 years? I forget now. So if you don't pay that much attention um, if you don't follow events particularly closely, you would, I guess, turn the page and not particularly care. But what does all this have to do with Jews? Uh, if they are perceived to be the perpetrator, then of genocide, then they, well, it is obviously an evil thing. But then Judaism gives them a religious obligation to exterminate the Amalekites. And the Amalekites appeared to be whoever Jews hate. And many rabbis have been saying that the Gazans are Amalekites and therefore deserve to be exterminated. And they say things about, having to do it, that they could, perhaps this could be accomplished in 5 years, and maybe they should have started before, something like that. So for any Gentile to consider converting to Judaism would be controversial, obviously, because of, well, the anti-Semitism. Do you want to be responsible for what the Jews have been doing to the Gazans? Probably not. And why would you convert to Judaism? Because its restrictions and punishments are much harder, are more severe than the punishments in the Quran, or, well, or even if you're not Muslim. So I think it would take a very special kind of Islamophobe if they wanted to, if have chosen not to follow Christianity. And why would an ex-Christian convert to Judaism rather than Islam, because obviously Islam is meant to be Judaism light, and going from Christianity to Judaism would be, I don't know, like not being able to swim and throwing yourself off at the deep end. So I see Olivari has arrived. Welcome, welcome, Olivari.
Hi, Claire. Terribly sorry about that. Just finished work quite late. Lost track of time. Thanks for
Well,
having me.
welcome. I hope I managed to make some sense in my ramblings before you arrived. You are very welcome. I'll just to introduce you. I met you through Khalid, who is an Ahmadi Muslim, and apparently you run Quran classes. And what I've noticed through him is that there seem to be a lot of non-Muslims who are running Quran classes, and you are one of them.
Yeah, we have quite a few Baha'is, quite a lot of Baha'is, me, humanist, agnostic atheist. There's a few Christians who are in the group. Yeah, it has an interfaith dimension to it.
I see. So, what piqued your interest in the Quran?
Oh, wow. I suppose I grew up around Sufi stories. I was raised around them. Just growing up in India, I was around a lot of Muslims, some in my own family, others family friends. So I was always interested in it, and I was raised, even though I was raised in an atheist family. My parents are atheists. My grandparents on one side are atheist. The wider family is religious, and coming from India. But I was raised always to respect and understand our neighbors. We may not believe the same thing, but we're going to be working together, living together, maybe even marrying, at least being friends. So it sort of behooves one in a humanistic way, I suppose, to understand the challenges, the struggles, the belief systems, the way people construct their identity. So I've always been interested in that. I started, I would say, a more focused study of Islam after discovering Rumi, the Muslim poet from the 1200s, Iranian Empire, Turkish Empire. After I discovered him in 2015 or maybe 2014, that started me off on a more sort of my adult life, a study of Islam.
So could I just stop you here because you said you grew up with Sufi stories, and I was wondering if you'd like to tell us one.
Well, yeah, racking my memory. The Tales of the Incomparable Mullah Nasruddin is one that I'd recommend. The modern compilation of it is by someone called Idris Shah. It's widely available. And so Mullah Nasruddin is kind of like I don't know, how should I say, Inspector Clouseau type, but spiritual Sufi type character who sort of gets into kind of bumbling situations, but actually ends up either aloof to the pain that a normal person would have suffered in that situation, or else not suffering it at all because he's just sort of so kind of above it all. He has that kind of a Zen, Taoist outlook on life, and just a bit of almost like he's too stupid in some. You always wonder, is he too stupid, and is that why he kind of came out well in that story, or is it because he's just some kind of secret enlightened person? So I don't know. I guess a quick story would be so Mullah Nasruddin's. This is again in sort of Islamic countries, maybe 1,000 years ago. He's bringing along a donkey with some sacks of hay, just sort of dirty hay that you usually use as a packing material. He's bringing along a donkey to a border and a fence with some guards on it. So he's sort of entering a city, and they stop him there and they say, listen, we have to, there's been some smuggling here, a lot of too much smuggling. And so people are bringing in goods and they're not paying the requisite tax and customs. So we're here to check, we're going to be, and many people have been coming like you with donkeys and so on. So we're going to have to do a very thorough search. they do it, and they can't find anything. Like they search him inside and out and everything, and then they let him go. And then on the way back, he comes back with some money, like with there's no donkey, no hay, but he's got the money. And then this happens several times, and they keep wondering, okay, well, he's going in there with with this, and but he's coming out exchanging it in somehow, but there doesn't seem to be anything of value that he has there. And so they ask him one time when he's coming back with the donkey and the hay, listen, okay, this is not part of our job. You're not carrying anything that's contraband as such, but how are you getting the money? And then he says, "Oh, it's right. I'm just selling the hay, because I've got someone there who really values my hay. I've told him that it's like going to make his donkey, super strong or something. And yeah,
Hmm.
I'm just selling the hay. That's why that's why I'm going into your town to trade." So it's just stories like that kind of just stay with you.
Hmm.
It's silly. But then you realize that actually it's not about the hay or it's not an economic story. It's about maybe we overlook the small things in our life that actually give us meaning.
So
And
let
yeah,
me
stories like that.
make sure I understand the story about the hay. So he keeps going through customs, and he has a lot of money, and the customs
He doesn't
officer
have. He
comes.
only
Well,
has money when he comes back. He only has money when he comes back out of the city.
right, meaning that he sold the hay for a lot of
He's
money.
selling the hay. Yeah, he's selling the hay. But the guards were sort of looking for some gold, looking for a gem, or looking for some kind of food or some other kind of more. They didn't actually realize that the hay, which is usually used as a packing material to pack other things of value, that itself has value, and that's what he's actually selling because he's managed to find someone else there in the city who wants his hay. That's what he's trying to smuggle in.
Oh, and prepared
Smuggle in.
to pay a premium for his special
Yeah, for
healthy
some
hay.
special hay or something. Yeah, he's found someone equally as stupid as him to buy the hay inside the city. So kind
Okay.
of two fools have made a kind of a arrangement, not because they're evil necessarily, but they're so below or so above the bureaucracy of customs and so on that they kind of slip through the net. That's the idea.
Um,
It's a reminiscent of a lot of Zen stories or Taoist stories where it just, if you think about it too much, you'll just go crazy and you're just thinking, what was the point of that? But I think I quite like it, and especially as a kid, it starts you thinking, and it starts you because as a kid, kids always ask why, and my grandma and my dad, I'd always used to bug them, and but that doesn't make sense. Why did that happen? Well, okay, you'll understand someday.
yes,
Um,
it seems to be an economics question, in that, some apparently worthless thing can be sold for a
yeah,
premium because it's supposed to have some particular quality. And you also mentioned Rumi, and he's a poet I know very little about. So I hope you will explain a little your interest in Rumi.
thank you. Yeah. My favorite topic. I can talk about Rumi for days, but yeah, briefly, I would say Rumi interested me, even though I was aware of Sufism and that aspect of Islam. Every religion has that mystical element to it. Meister Eckhart, for example, in Christianity, Rumi, Shams, Hafiz, and many others in Sufism with the mystical heart of Islam, Vedanta in Hinduism. Many religions have this kind of spiritual heart, Zen Buddhism. Um, that emphasizes the inner experience rather than sort of what I'm wearing, what I can eat and not eat, and sort of the outer parts of religion. The inner parts of religion are more emphasized, the experience, the inner state. Ghazali, probably one of the most famous Islamic scholars, who wasn't a Sufi himself, but he learnt a lot from the Sufis. He said he saw that Sufis are people of states, not statements, whereas others can quote from the Quran. They have a lot of states, they have a lot of statements, sorry, they have a lot of discourses. They can hold dialogue, but ultimately they're not allowing the religion to change themselves from within. They're not actually having that spiritual transformation. Whereas Sufis place a primacy on that. And so, as part of that, I was introduced to Rumi, um, who he lived in under the Persian Empire, born in sort of modern day Afghanistan, and lived in Konya, Turkey, and died there. He's buried there. And I was attracted to him because he was someone who rose very high up in the non-mystical aspects of Islam. He became a professor, he was a teacher, he had a cadre of students and admirers, he had lovely clothes, and he was possessions. He did very well for himself in all of the normal ways of climbing the ladder, as you might say.
Mm-hmm.
You might say the corporate ladder today, but maybe there um, it was the academic ladder, and the ulama really respected him. But then he was transformed by meeting a Sufi who really told him and made him realize that what he was doing there was just building a house of cards. All of the academia, all of the adoration, he's not actually allowing himself to be transformed inside. And he had that transformation, and that one loving kind of input into his life from the spiritual teacher who was like a rogue Sufi wearing wool, stinking of like a goat, not showering. But then there's Rumi, sort of the elaborately coiffed professor who's got this cadre of students running after him. So these two people meet, and Rumi's transformed, and he spends the rest of his life essentially writing poetry. He describes, before I used to hold the Quran and kind of preach from the pulpit, but now I just hold, metaphorically, love's flagon. So I'm drunk on the wine of love for Shams in that mystical kind of way, someone who opened the doors for him and opened the doors of insight. And he loved Prophet Muhammad, in a new way he'd not loved before, from just sort of the dry reading of the text. He's living it now. He describes he's walking through the market. He can hear the blacksmith in the market banging on the metal and the hammer on what he's working on. And even that, he said, he could sort of hear the ringing of Allah, Allah, Allah. And then he started dancing. And this kind of what we associate with Sufis now, the whirling and the dancing and that ecstatic state. He founded that school, the Mevlevi school, based in Turkey, because he could see that there's sort of God and beauty in so many things that he saw around him. And
Mm-hmm.
that really struck a chord with me. I mean, even as someone coming from a atheist background, I saw a way there where there were things that science couldn't adequately describe, and then I realized what the limits of science were. That doesn't mean that I believe in the supernatural, or that I believe in a God, or that I can believe in heaven or reincarnation or these things, but the experience that he had, I think, is a and then that sort of led me towards an idea of humanistic spirituality. How can we have a spiritual experience? Carl Sagan talked a lot about this. That's not dependent on, but that can be shared. I can share that with Rumi. He's probably the person that's influenced my life the most.
Mm-hmm.
But
Would you like
without
to
being
quote a
religious.
line or two from his poetry to share with us your love of Rumi?
Sure, yeah. So that one that I quoted was one from him. My hand used to hold the Quran, now it holds love's flagon. Another one would be um,
Love's
dance
flagon. What's that?
flagon of wine.
Oh.
So which is prohibited in Islam, but
Mm.
the Sufis would often, that's the way they could use that. And when you say your lips are like a rose, or you have a moon-like face, which is a very common Asian imagery for describing a woman's beauty. All of these things don't actually literally mean. I mean, there is some debate as to whether Rumi actually meant wine, but I think the consensus is that he wasn't like some kind of drunkard, but he was drunk on the ecstasy. And even that was actually too much for some of the more hardline traditional Muslims who'd say, listen, you're betraying too much of your emotion, and don't describe Allah like a lover, because that's as you might imagine, the blasphemy charges came out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every Tom, Dick, and Abdullah gets accused of blasphemy by people they don't like. They're kind of
Mm-hmm.
interlocutors in any religious debate, so that doesn't really tell us much. So he was, it's not quite controversial, but he certainly struck a chord. I mean, I think at one point he was the most popular poet read in America. I mean, his books that have been translated now, and he's all over Instagram. His quotes, or at least adaptations of his quotes, are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so that idea of love conquering all. I mean, the 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak, a Turkish author. I mean, she's used Rumi as an inspiration. Many celebrities, but also just many activists. They've Arundhati Roy especially have been inspired by his work, and I think because he speaks to something that strikes a chord with everyone. He speaks from a position of definitely Muslim references. He refers to the Quran. His Masnavi, his one of his maybe his most famous work, is often referred to as the Quran in Farsi, in Persian. So
Hmm.
it's very based and steeped in Islam. But I guess with time, we look back on, and some people like to divorce him from Islam and just let me just take the spiritual kind of loving, things that I don't know Julia Roberts may or Gwyneth Paltrow may like, and divorce that from his Islam. I would say I love Rumi too much to do that. I think I want to understand him in his time and in his place, which is not my time and place. I mean, he would do,
Hmm.
if he could meet me, he'd probably judge me in many ways and think that I've failed in my life. I'm not living a good life. But that's for me to
Would you like
decide,
to
not for
quote
him.
another verse other than the love's flagon one?
Yeah, I could. I'm not sure that I can remember too many of it off by heart. That was one that sort of that came to mind.
Hmm. Yes, because I suppose I was thinking in terms of, well, he's obviously into spirituality and talking about transcendent states of
Yeah.
being and feeling.
So this is one from his Masnavi, 1685. The reference, verse 1685. How could you make such a plea to the spear or sword, since it is merely a captive in the hand of that exalted one? He is like the azar in workmanship, and I am like the idol. Whatever object he makes of me, I become that. If he makes me into a cup, I become a cup, and if he makes me into a dagger, I become a dagger. If he makes me into a fountain, I give water, and if he makes me into fire, I give heat. If he makes me into rain, I give harvest stacks, and if he makes me into a small arrow, I spring into the body of the enemy. If he makes me into a snake, I spew poison, and if he makes me into a friend, I perform service.
He seems to be saying he is the slave of God and he will do whatever God commands
It's a
him.
yeah, it's an expression of his helplessness in some way, as you might be in when you're in love, when you say the beloved, whatever, wherever you go, whatever you want me to do, I'll do that just out of love for you. So he's expressing that all of the power is with his God, and he's a plaything there, which is in some ways it's almost well, one of the most common Islamic names is Abdallah, so slave of God, which is can be seen on the one side as a curse. You're somebody's slave, but you're the slave of the Almighty God, of this, the great cosmos, the great power, and you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about dying or pain or anything like this, because God has a plan for you, and that's Rumi's way of expressing it, which yeah, I find really beautiful and inspiring.
Yes, I suppose if God did indeed create us, then we are his slaves. So I guess the difference is between those of us who know it and those of us who deny it.
Well, I don't think it's a given that if he created us, we have to be his slaves. In fact, I think it's quite a common religious idea that we have something called free will, and we are not just automatons, like maybe a penguin or a ant or a caterpillar. God created it to do something. If you believe that God created it and that there is a God, then it just follows it doesn't have a free will, it doesn't have a conscience, as far as we
Well,
know.
but slaves do have free will and do occasionally mount slave rebellion. So um, I, 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 I mean, it would be a mistake to think that a slave doesn't have free will. I suppose the slave feels he has to obey in order to, um, well, to be in good standing with the master and be well treated. Otherwise, he might be punished for being disobedient or something like that. Mm.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good clarification. A slave, and as in one definition of slave could be I have no free will. I have to do whatever I'm told or whatever I'm programmed to do. Another way is just that, like you're saying, I'm a slave to you. I do have free will, but I'm almost powerless to exercise it because I'm so in love with you. You being, it could be romantic love. It could be in this case like Rumi, his divine spiritual love for Shams, the Sufi that transformed his life, and by definition, he sees the light of God in Shams, who came into his life at that time. And yeah, that opened up to me a beauty and a grandeur in a way of life that I'd not seen. I mean, again, Carl Sagan, a few figures have really embraced both the scientific side of life and the spiritual beauty and the mystical side of life. Not many. And I definitely want to be counted amongst one of those who can play and are equally at home in both sandboxes, as it were, in both playgrounds. So I have a scientific background. I've been training in neuroscience. That was my academic background, and I'm a humanist activist and atheist activist. But I have no problem discussing and studying the spiritual and humanistic value in something like the Quran, which is read by billions of people around the world. So as a humanist, I'm interested in what humans believe.
Yes. Do you study other scripture of other religions?
Yeah, so Thursdays is Quran class, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
If I can remember, Mondays and Wednesdays is a Baha'i study class where we study Baha'i texts, various texts. The Quran class has been going for a long time because the Quran, that one text, is just, I mean, we don't take too many tangents off into other texts. It's a book to study over a lifetime. The other classes we'll maybe change text once every few weeks. We don't read various texts, but the theme is Baha'i on Wednesdays, and then Tuesdays we have a Bhagavad Gita class, which is one of the main Hindu texts,
Mm-hmm.
and then some other. I used to have a Kabbalah study going, but that's kind of dwindled a bit. And then Sunday also again other interfaith classes. So yeah, this started mainly during the pandemic lockdowns here when we weren't able to leave the house and more people were getting familiar with Zoom, and the idea of spending your evening on Zoom wasn't so much of a strange idea, and it's kind of continued really.
Yes, you sound the ideal person to go to for comparative religion. Would you like to say a few words about how you're finding your study of the Baha'i faith and the Bhagavad Gita? And um, I'd be quite interested to know. I know it's a bit off topic, but I am sort of interested.
Yeah, I'm happy to. That's, you study mankind and how people form their beliefs and the differences, but also the similarities. I think it's easy to see when we approach it, especially with my natural inclination, just given who I am, is to look for the mystical, is to look past the idea that, okay, well, they wear these clothes and they wear these clothes and they pray, towards this city, and that these people pray this way. Those are the exoteric things. I look for the esoteric things, the inner, the transcendent, and those things I find are all the same. Some kind of a reverence towards or I'm not just saying between religions, but even between religions and people like, say, Carl Sagan, who's a humanist, who's a scientist, cosmologist, or Einstein or Spinoza, who they may or may not use the word God. So the mystical approach to life really makes us aware of and using terms and the outer aspects of religion. What do you call your God? Do you even use the word God? What do you wear? What do you eat or not eat? These are useful parts of culture. You shouldn't disregard them. I don't mean to belittle them, but for me, they're not the things that I use to judge the worthiness of a belief system. What I used to judge that is the heart. And if when I read the Bhagavad Gita, when I read the Baha'i text, I see a beauty in that, a beauty that Rumi he opened that door for me, and that door then allowed me to view every other religious system that I come across, and even humanism. It allowed me to view the beauty in my own kind of belief system or humanism that I was raised in. It's not just a cold technocratic, bean counting endeavor, reading meters and physics and so on. There's a grandeur in there as well. There's a humanistic spirituality, So again, everything comes back to Rumi and flows to Rumi for me. And indeed, the Baha'i texts refer to Rumi quite a lot. The Baha'i faith is an outgrowth of Islam,
But
about a few hundred
Baha'u'llah
years
is
old.
Persian, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. So they're from the same culture. So he
Hmm.
refers a lot to his compatriot. Baha'u'llah lived, in the 1800s, and Rumi lived in the 1200s. But they both come from the Abrahamic Islamic tradition. And Baha'u'llah spearheaded a reform movement coming out of, because by that time, from Rumi's time in the Golden Age down to the 1800s, especially in Iran and Persia at that time, he felt that Islam had become very decadent, very corrupt, very superstitious, a lot of bribery, a lot of corruption in society. They'd moved away from a divine civilization, which is what they believed that Muhammad and all the prophets were trying to guide humanity towards. So it needed another refresh. And Baha'is have a very tense relationship, to say the least, with Islam, because Islam, the Orthodox Islamic view is that Muhammad was the last prophet and the last messenger that God will ever send, whereas Baha'is believe differently. But I don't concern myself too much with that. I mean, I'm aware of the academic debates on both sides, and I have my view. But coming back to the beauty and the spiritual content of them, I see many similarities, and I love moving between them. And I don't really have to wear a different hat as such. It's just quite natural. I just sort of, I sense that the mystical lens on life gives me quite an easy way to move between studies of these various faiths.
So what would you say is the difference between Islam and the Baha'i faith?
The Baha'i faith is a more modern religion. I would say it's more liberal in its kind of core orthodoxy, and also in the fact that its founder, Baha'u'llah, wrote things in his own writing, in his, in his pen, and we have those preserved. Not all of the texts in English, at least, but many of the texts have been preserved, so we know directly what he thought of his own revelation, and he claimed to be a messenger of God. Whereas that's not really the case with Jesus. He didn't write anything down. Muhammad was illiterate. And there was been other prophets before that. Obviously, it was in ancient history, and we don't have the surviving in their own hand, and that gives Baha'is a clarity. And although, like you might imagine, every religion has some sects and people saying, "I interpret it this way, I interpret it that way," and there have been some efforts to sectarianize the Baha'i faith, but mostly it's not succeeded. And the whatever it is, 8 million, 10 million Baha'is in the world are mostly singing from the same hymn sheet. Whereas, for example, with Islam, there's Sunni, Shia, Ahmadiyya, and then there's the Sufis, and there's so many of them, Deobandi. When that's not happened so much with the Baha'i faith, again, it's quite young. Maybe it may happen in the future, but women don't have to have their head covered, for example. Specifically, that's been removed as a command under the Islamic period, but the Baha'is see themselves as humanity's progressed, humanity's matured, so the laws that Jesus or Muhammad laid down, even though they are true, they're not wrong, they were more relevant for that time, but not for this time. And male-female equality is more encouraged. Marriage, interfaith marriage can also occur. You don't have to marry another Baha'i. You're not born into the Baha'i faith like you are born a Muslim. You can be born into a Baha'i family, but you have to choose to be Baha'i and get confirmed and declare, minimum age 15, and no one can pressure you to do that. I mean, even in Islam, no one should be pressuring you, but from my observation of that, Baha'is seem to be quite good at living up to that aspect of their faith. And there's many other ones as well. They have similar things. They're sort of footprints of Islam in the Baha'i faith. They fast, but they fast at a different time of year. They don't pray pointing towards any city. They don't pray towards Mecca. So there have been differences. Like every religion has some way of differentiating itself from the religion that preceded it. But I find myself, because of Rumi, there's the mystical heart of Islam. I'd be more than happy to study Islam, be immersed in Islam, and also the Baha'i faith, which is a bit more mystical, a bit more liberal, a bit less about Sharia and the exoteric aspects of religion, like beards or things like this, that are in the Quran, or coverings, covering your modesty, etc.
Yes.
So I feel myself a bit closer in spirit to the Baha'i faith in that
Yes.
sense.
Yes. And since you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, I suppose I'll have to ask you um, to tell us a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita. And yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, the Gita is another text of world spiritual history, the civilizational text. It inspired most famously Mahatma Gandhi in his whole life. It's a discourse, it's written as a dialogue between Krishna, which is an avatar of God, incarnation of God, and a warrior. Um, and their discourse forms the Gita, 700 verses. And it's there's no Bible as such in Hinduism or like Quran equivalents in Hinduism, but the closest thing that you would come to is would be the Gita if you want a core distillation of what Hinduism is about. It's there, even though it's mainly read by the followers of Krishna, whereas there's other avatars or other incarnations of God. Shiva, you might have heard of,
Hmm.
um, and Brahman as well. So there are others, and there's many other offshoots from Hinduism, Jainism, etc. But all of these religions, Jainism, Hinduism, I think even some Buddhists would read the Gita, because all of the what's called the Dharmic religions have a common interest in the Gita, and Dharma meaning religious destiny, religious duty, which is a core concept in Indian philosophy and also in Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. So the Dharmic religions are Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, um, and that's a lot of that is about understand. It's about enlightenment. It's a book on moksha. Moksha is enlightenment, is liberation. How do we liberate ourselves from the human condition, from overthinking things, from being too attached to material possessions? We want something, and when we get it, we're disappointed by it. We want something else. The grass is always greener. These are the kind of topics which are universal,
Hmm.
human condition problems that it tries to address.
Yes, yes. While you were talking, what I was trying to remember about Hinduism just flashed across my mind, and I was thinking, the Mahabharata, what's that about? And then the Vedas, it's like the Rig Veda and the something else. um,
Yes, yeah. The
about
Hindu canon can be, yeah, quite dizzying.
Yes. So the Mahabharata, that is, perhaps you could just explain in very briefly what that's about, or perhaps you haven't read it. Is it a storybook? You were saying that the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between Krishna
Yeah.
and God, and
Yes,
the
that's right.
Mahabharata is a different.
Between God and one of the protagonists. Arjuna, his name is Arjuna.
Mhm,
So it's kind of like a, Moses in the burning bush type thing, but that happens over 700 verses, and they have a long dialogue. And Arjuna, the main protagonist, who's a normal human being, he has all of these problems. He has a paralysis, he has depression, he has, a hesitation about what to do with his life. He's
mhm,
overthinking things. He has an ethical dilemma. He has quandaries. So he's really in a bit of a bad state at the start. And his
mhm,
dialogue with Krishna exposes all of these spiritual lessons and gems that are also very popular on Instagram. It's very quotable. The Gita. That's why it's not like a huge tome, like for example the Mahabharata or some of the other more arcane technical Indian spiritual texts, which are quite heavy going. The Bhagavad
mhm,
Gita is very very easy to read, relatively speaking. The Mahabharata is a massive. It's probably the longest poem ever written, I think, including all of the Greek ones and so on. It's massive.
mhm.
And that a part of that is the Bhagavad Gita. It's extracted and it's read by itself as well, because it kind of has you can sort of draw a box around it and extract it. But the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata narrative. That's right.
Oh,
I've
right.
not read the whole of it, no, but I've read pieces of it.
Right. Well, yes, thank you for making things a little clearer. So, out of all these religions that you've studied, if you had to choose one, do you forced to choose one, which one would you choose?
I don't know. There's no way of answering that question. It's like saying, which one of my relatives, I don't have children, but which one of my children I love more, or uh, yeah, which one of my family members I love more.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
Islam, because of Rumi, would obviously be a consideration, but I mean, Zen Buddhism, I've been immersed in, if I even maybe a bit longer. But again, as I say, because Rumi opened the doors to so many things, I then went back and revisited things in my childhood, like Sufism, like Zen Buddhism, and found it's exactly what he's been saying. And I found that what Aldous Huxley famously called the divine ground, or the perennial philosophy, that philosophy that permeates mystically all religions. And I find myself really as part of that group. So I don't really see any distinction between the religions. I'm a student of love. I'm a student of the perennial philosophy. What religion, Hinduism or Islam, it's like, what jacket I wear today. It doesn't really matter too much to me.
So Zen Buddhism, there are other kinds of Buddhism, aren't there? Zen Buddhism is the Japanese kind, would you say?
Yeah, so Zen Buddhism grew out of, I guess, Taoism. Taoism came sort of before. I think that predates it, I would say. It draws from Taoism. It also has, I think it has roots in, I think, is it Mahayana Buddhism? I'm not a Buddhism expert by any means.
Yeah, I
But
know
I think
that
it's,
this one called the greater and the others called the lesser vehicle,
yes,
Mahayana and Hinayana. I'm a
yeah.
bit vague about it, but yes.
Yeah, it's certainly very popular in Japan, but I would say Japan is more Shinto Buddhism. I'm not sure. I've not. I would say there's some relationship between all Buddhist practices, obviously, but I would say it's more. It was more formed in China, and
Mhm.
because it had influences from the Taoist school that then had an influence on the Mahayana Buddhism that then sort of gave birth to, so Mahayana Buddhism plus influences from the, I think maybe the Chan school or the Taoist school, then you get Zen Buddhism. So it's kind of a child of that within China, and then of course it spread all over Asia and the world.
Mhm, mhm. So I do see that you are more preoccupied with spirituality than the strict law of these different religions. And I have to confess that I'm more interested in the uh, rule-based side of religion. Um, and going back to the subject of this discussion, I suppose I'm trying to be practical. It's sort of like, well, obviously, you know, we will all take the bits that we like out of any religion and concentrate on the bits that we like. If we are a legalistic sort of person, then we'll go for the rules. If we want, inner peace and spirituality, we'll go for the spiritual side of things. And even Judaism has kind of divided itself into the Hasidic movement and which is different to the more rule based, halakhic side of Judaism. And I suppose being trained as a lawyer, I just inclined, more to one than the other. And I wonder if you have any views of whether you think society might be um, better um, if more of the rules were taken more seriously. Yes, that was a question I was trying to formulate. Thank you for your patience.
Mm. I would say that I refer to another figure who's probably second to Rumi, influenced me quite a lot from the Islamic school, Ghazali earlier. Um, he was the one that said Sufis are people of states, not statements. But he, as well as analyzing the Sufis, he also spent and walked with, and he was like Rumi, someone who rose very high um, in the legalistic, jurisprudential, scholarly, academic world of his time. And he was, and he lived a bit before Rumi. I think he lived in the previous century, the 1100s, and again also in the golden age of Islam. And he was, and if opinions differ, but he probably is the, by consensus, the best mind of Islamic civilization. Maybe Ibn Sina, I don't know, but he's certainly there in the top two or three. And for the first parts of his life, like Rumi, he was sort of making waves in the materialistic, um, academic world and writing, like his Ihya Ulumuddin, which is the revivification of the religious sciences, which again, it talked about etiquette, gave a lot of rules and advice, examined the hadith. So very, very textual, scriptural work. He's done all of that, and he realized that actually, that's no protection against avarice, against corruption, against the ego dominating things. And you have all of these people, ulama, just abrogating power to themselves and dispensing religious advice, and it's one rule for their flock and one rule for them. That really can't be prevented unless we have that inner transformation that the Sufis try and look for. I mean, the Sufis may not be perfect, but at least they don't pretend to be perfect. And certainly if they do actually drink wine, or if they they're kind of rogues and they don't pay attention to society's laws, at least they don't pretend to. Whereas the ulama Ghazali found, and also Rumi and Shams especially found, they were even somehow worse, because okay, they may obey some of the rules, but they pick and choose what rules to obey, but they give the impression that they're obeying all of the rules, and that just it's insulting, and it's patronizing, and it's even more corrosive for the religious life of a society than what the Sufis are doing. So based on that, I mean, from taking Ghazali's inspiration, I wouldn't say I'm an academic scholar or anything by any means, but my heart is naturally more towards the mystical side of things, but I still do have a great appreciation and time for example, studying hadith, studying the Bhagavad Gita, the rules that it gives for life, and the laws and that come out of it. Because again, I'm interested in humans, and as much as I might like it to be different, most of the people in the world are not mystical, and actually most aren't even spiritual. Most just want a recipe book. They want instructions. They want, if I do this, and this, I'll go to heaven, or I'll be happy, or I'll have whatever paradise. They just want that. They just want their accountant who tells them what to do with their taxes. Their doctor tells them what to do with their vitamins, and the priest, the spiritual, the imam tells them what to do with their moral life and their spiritual life. That's what they want. They don't want to take that all on board and be a theologically independent thinking individual soul, even though the Quran says that we should be. So people don't want that, and that's even during Muhammad's time. Even he said in the Quran, Lord, my people treat this Quran as a thing abandoned. Even during his time, before he didn't have a chance to complete the revelation and die, and to be martyred, and to be kind of revered as a prophet after his death, people had already abandoned it. So and Matthew in the Bible says this very well: enter by the narrow gate, don't enter by the wide gate, because wide is the way and broad is the path that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. And narrow is the way and crooked is the path that leads to salvation, and few find it. So the mystical salvation kind of path, in seeing the perennial philosophy, by definition, only a few people are going to be interested in that. And you can't give up on the majority. I'm a humanist. I can't give up on the majority of people. So I need to, okay, fine. If they want Sharia, let's talk about Sharia. Let's talk about hijab. Let's talk about, if that is where the people are. So we have to pay some attention to that and find a way of living society in that way. And listen, Rome wasn't built in a day. And we have to start with the world as it is. I would say it's too general a question to answer. Would it be better if people followed those rules more than they do now? What rules? What interpretation of rules? I think it differs by country to country. Someone would say Saudi Arabia follows the rules of Islam very well. I don't think it does. But is that a better society or not? I wouldn't say that Western liberal democracies necessarily are free of hypocrisy and are free of fault when it comes to these things. They proposed a way. I mean, it seems to be that Sweden, Finland, Norway, maybe Japan as well, seem to be the cultures and societies that come up on the top of the development index and happiness index. They allow some room for religion, but they don't allow it to interfere and to, for the tail to wag the dog in their politics and their society. Could be something to learn from, but we don't really know. I think we have to look at a case-by-case basis.
Yes, it's all to do with the definition of words, and I think we are really discussing philosophy, I suppose, and philosophy is about breaking down the meaning of words. What do we mean by um, happiness, well-being, justice, etc.? Um, but before I forget, I suppose I've just been trying to concentrate on the things that you've been telling us, and I actually know very little about Ghazali, so I'm hoping you could give us a little mini lecture on Ghazali and why we should what we have
Ghazali,
to learn from.
yes. Yeah, of course. I think Ghazali in many ways is, and well, it, in some ways he's more accessible to the I would say traditional religionist, or someone who says I need to look at scripture, I need to look at, rather than going straight into a mystical Rumi who's in love with everything, and he's the slave, he's the poison, he's the water. That can sort of strike people a bit if you're not mystically minded like me. Maybe it may not make sense, it may not compute. Whereas Ghazali, it takes a more traditional approach to religion. He does respect the Sufis eventually. He does sort of revere them towards the end of his life, but he spends most of his life um, being exposed to logic, grammar, the traditional methods of Arabic and Islamic, golden age education at that time. And I'd say he lived in the 1100s. He rose to be the Hojatul Islam of his century. Every century, according to sort of Islamic, I guess, myth or legend, there's going to be someone who renews the religion or is the proof of Islam in that century. And for the centuries before him, after Muhammad died, so 700, 800, 900 CE, and the centuries after him, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, so on, there's disputes over who is the proof of Islam, the Hujjat Islam of the century. In Ghazali's century, as far as I know, there's no debate, because it's him. He
Oh, he's
wrote.
another Persian.
He's another Persian. He's another
Hmm.
Persian. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's born in I can't remember exactly, but yeah, but he didn't travel as far as Rumi did. I think Rumi moved to modern day Turkey, whereas Ghazali stayed in modern day Iran and Iraq, in that area. And
Hmm.
but he as well had a crisis similar to what Rumi had when Shams entered his life, and he was sort of struck by this. He had a crisis where um, he was, again, it's a quite a nice story that encapsulates it. He was traveling. Ghazali was traveling from one city to another city on a donkey in a caravan, and he had all of his notes and annotations and lecture notes and all of that, his thesis and so on and so on. It was all stuffed in bags on the side of his donkey. The caravan was waylaid by bandits, and the lead bandit sort of came up to him and said, "Okay, give me everything you've got." And Ghazali said, "Listen, take everything, take all the gold, take my belts, and take the clothes, whatever. But please leave me my writings. These are my spiritual legacy. This is my life. If I lose these things, then I'll lose my status. I'll lose, all of the work that I've done, to better our religion." And he said, "You're Muslim as well, aren't you? It's our religion." And the bandit, is kind of quite maybe the words of God came to him in that moment or something, and
Hmm.
his reply cut Ghazali to the quick, and he said, "Okay, that's interesting. So if I take away these notes, these scriptures, your writings, if I take those away and burn them, then you're nothing. You know, so what's your life been in aid of then?" And he just walked away. And from that moment on, I mean, that's a very famous story in Ghazali's life. So he's then spent the rest of his life contemplating this. So what actually, almost like Descartes, I think, therefore I am. What am I? What can I actually know for sure? So he spent the rest of his life a lot of memorization and a lot in really looking again at the philosophers, the theologians that he'd been learning by rote and debating and dialoguing with, but not actually really looking behind and saying, well, what are they actually doing to further the cause of the religion and also to become better people themselves? And that's when he then rewrote. So when he says the revivification of the religious sciences, or the rejuvenation, which is a major work, Ihya Ulumuddin, he's saying he's revivifying them because he sees that they've become decadent, because it's become a debating society, it's become philosophy, it's become, the sultan or the caliph one day will have his dancing girls to amuse himself, one day he'll have his, I don't know, joker and juggler, and another day he'll have the imams come and debate the Quran, and it's all just part of the entertainment. It's nothing. It's one of just one aspect of society instead of being a spiritual lifeblood of society. It's just another thing that, okay, well, like politics, once every 5 years you have to go and vote. Well, no, that's not politics. Politics is what you do every day, every week in your community. Are you organizing and being an activist? It was that kind of a difference. So he went and tried to revivify it. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed because I think Islam still has many problems. The majority of people went in by the wide gate, as we can say. He tried to go in by the narrow gate, but people didn't follow him, which we shouldn't be surprised by because that's what the holy texts tell us, I guess. So that was Ghazali, but his autobiography I'd really recommend, The Rescuer from Error, i.e. God rescued him from error, starting with that bandit waylaying the caravan, and he also became. I mean, by the end of it, I think he left his position. He was the equivalent of a tenured professor at age 24. In our modern day parlance, he was really he'd reached the summit. And he ended up just becoming a sweeper in the library, sort of in the back, in the institutions that were teaching his books. His books would be in the lecture theatre teaching them, but he'd be actually at the back because he's just given up on, ego-centered debates and testosterone, and again, a lot of it was male-dominated. He'd given up on all of that, and he said, "Listen, I'm just focusing on myself. I'm just focusing on states, not statements." So by the end of it, he also had that kind of a fall from grace, but he was, he rose from the ashes to be more of a mystically reverent individual. And I think a great example, and he wasn't perfect by any means. He really wasn't perfect in so many ways. But I'm drawn to him because he was imperfect and he had this kind of realization and humility, which is very important to me.
Mm-hmm. Did he marry and have children?
Yes, I think he did. He married. Yeah, same with Rumi. I think it's sort of like, unless you were someone like Shams or like a real rogue or a dervish who really lived outside of society, you didn't marry. But yes, he had married. So I think he was actually struck dumb, like deaf and dumb, by his kind of realization that he'd wasted most of his life on trivialities, and his wife had to take care of him. So I think he was married.
Right. Yes, for some reason, yesterday I looked up the incoherence of philosophers, and I didn't really grasp all the points, but is that one of his books that you did have a look at, or not?
Yes. So that's one of his. So he's written dozens, hundreds of books in text, and not all of them been translated into English. And I don't read Farsi. I don't read Persian, and my Arabic is very limited. So, but the Ihya Ulumuddin, the revivification of religious sciences I mentioned earlier, is at least major parts of it are in English, as far as I know. The Incoherence, the Incoherence of the Philosophers, is a standard text, is a classic in Ghazali literature, and it was one of the reasons that one of the I think probably the first text I read from him. Maybe the first text was his autobiography, but that one was, and that was quite good because he was trying to answer this idea of the Greek wisdoms that were being translated into Arabic and entering the Islamic civilization. How to come to grips with those? And that's when I say that he's a mystical, he has both mystical sides and a kind of logical academic side. He saw that we shouldn't automatically dismiss wisdom and teachings from outside of the Islamic civilization just because they're non-Islamic. And one of his favorite hadiths is Prophet Muhammad's, who says that we should seek knowledge, and the Islamic teaching also in the Quran, that we should seek knowledge even unto China, i.e. China being a non-Muslim country. So we shouldn't really care where knowledge comes from. We should take it in and judge it by our own theological tools and what we learn from the Quran, what we learn from the prophets and his life and so on. Based on that, we should make a judgment and we should include that. So he tried to analyze the philosophers, Aristotle, etc. And he tried to engage with them. I would say with varying levels of success. I mean, Ibn Sina probably did a better job of it, and history has proved Ibn Sina right. I would say more than Ghazali. But I don't love Ghazali because of his philosophical accuracy or his successful dispensation of Aristotle and Plato's challenges and their science and their empiricism. But it's a fearsome logical text. So he wrote The Incoherence of the Philosophers, and then Ibn Sina came along afterwards and wrote The Incoherence of the Incoherence, and he replied to Ghazali. Um, to me, you might expect me, and many people are shocked, that as a humanist, as an agnostic atheist, I should be praising Ibn Sina more, which, for example, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson do, and they have a real problem with Ghazali. And I said, sure. I mean, listen, I'm not my admiration of people like Rumi and Ghazali doesn't come from whether they were right or wrong necessarily. I judge them in their time and place. I understand who they are, and I don't impose my necessarily. Yeah, I can take inspiration from them without having to impose my 21st century knowledge and values and post hoc um, hindsight with 2020 vision on who they are and what they got right and what wrong. What I'm more interested in is how they approached the problems in their lives. For example, like how they responded when the bandit came along, or when Shams came along to Rumi, and the legend goes, he took all of his books and threw them in the fountain. And he shocked Rumi, and he made him think, what are you actually doing with your life? We're only here for a short time, and you don't want to just be some kind of a librarian or a scribe doing all these academic things. Academics is important, scholarly pursuits are important, but they have to change you within. You have to become more righteous. You have to become good conduct. That's the aim of religion. If that's not happening, then all the rest is in vain. So for that, yeah, Ghazali is really important to me, as is Rumi.
Yes, I mean, I think the bandit saying, I'm going to, burn your books and take your notes, and I suppose when it happens, you think, well, did I even remember what I thought I learned? Or would it be lost to memory if, all our notes went? What would we remember, and would it be the most important bits? I suppose is my question, because I suppose for people who write a lot and talk a lot, I wonder if we were kind of forced to choose how much of it is actually meaningful or worth preserving. So
Exactly.
I like that being made that choice. But yes, I think even notes in the margins can be forgotten, but also very revealing of all kinds of things that might have been going through our mind at the time years ago when we made that note that we don't even remember, what the scribble was, or we can't because we can't decipher it because memory is imperfect. Um,
Yeah, let's be people of states, not statements, because statements are very cheap. Proverbs 13:3, the Bible also says the same thing. He that keepeth his tongue keepeth his life. He that opens his lips too wide shall bring on his own destruction. And a big part of one of the big core parts of Ghazali's Ihya, his revivification text, is prohibitions of the tongue and how the ego can. And he talks about Muhammad and his companions, and how they're very, very careful about what they said with their tongues, because it can get us into trouble a lot. And he spent a lot of his time, Ghazali, after that experience, focusing on his life. How am I spending my time? What am I doing with my days? Am I praying enough? Like you said, I can't remember everything. I can't remember 30,000 hadiths and Sharia rules and laws. Of course, you need elders in your community, and you need experts who can advise you. But day to day, I just need to focus. I need to narrow my focus, narrow my vision, just have blinders on, just focus on the things that are important to me. Family, whatever it may be, whatever your dharma, to mix religions as I often do, whatever your dharma is, whatever your religious duty or your spiritual destiny is, to be an artist, to be a teacher, to be, um, you know, a person, or a celebrity, whatever, politician, whatever it can be, or a mix of those. Focus on that, and the wider we concern ourselves, try and be a jack of all trades, is the path to ruin, certainly, and to confusion, and to more temptation and error. And Ghazali's life demonstrates that a lot, where he was actually, to be fair to him, he was as close to a master of all trades as you could probably get, at least among his social milieu at that time.
Mhm.
But yeah, it still ended up, his wrecking his life.
Yes, yes. I mean, what you just said made me think that the truth is political, and it's not. And well, I suppose the truth is what isn't disputed, but so many things are disputed that I suppose previous generations would say, well, we never argued about that. Well, why are you arguing about this silly thing now? And I suppose the most um, political truth would be, going back to the title of this video, um, whether we should obey God's laws, even if we don't think He exists, and that, I suppose, is one of the more engaging political questions of the day, in my opinion. I mean, I was discussing Galileo earlier this week, and just to make the point that um, science can be very political, because Galileo was saying the sun does not go around the earth, it's the other way around. And the Catholic Church was, well, trying to suppress his astronomical findings, because they didn't want to admit that they'd been wrong. Because once they admit that they were wrong about geocentrism, people will naturally begin to ask what else they might have been wrong about. And so that was the reason why Galileo's scientific findings had to be suppressed. And I can
And
think of many more.
Ghazali would say, Ghazali would say at that point, so that is a new piece of information coming into the religion. We should not reject that just because it's politically inconvenient to us, or it's culturally inconvenient, or it embarrasses us that we didn't come up with that ourselves. Ghazali would say, no, we should welcome that, because that's right. We can observe that, and that's an observable, as the Quran instructs us to do, to observe, to understand the world around us, to investigate that. And that humility is, I think, that's what drew me more to being inspired by Ghazali's life, rather than the Catholic Church and the popes at that time, for example.
Yes. So we were, I guess, at some level, we are talking about morality, because we're asking, should we obey God's laws? And in terms of morality, I would say there is this implicit uh, idea that you can't be a moral person if you are a liar, or if you believe in nonsense, and you don't um, and if you don't rely on sound arguments. And I suppose, um, yeah. So I'm basically saying, we can't have justice if we don't respect the truth, if we don't make diligent attempts to discover the truth. Because if we make a decision based on incorrect information, then we are just bound to cause injustice. So I guess that's why truth is so important, and in the commandment of not bearing false witness, um, perjury becomes an imprisonable offence, and morality becomes impossible if everybody's a liar.
Oh yeah, I agree. And having an honesty, going back to Ghazali, a sense of adab, that etiquette, that bearing, that nobility is very important to him. And that's, he would say, those are the things that we need to be working on: patience, emotional intelligence, again, restraining our tongue. Do we need to be in every debate? Honesty, keeping our promises, things like this. These are what really matter, not how many Quranic verses you've memorized, or how many debates you've won, or how many kings or courtiers you've impressed by what you do. And if we don't have that, then yeah, that leads to a corruption of the society. I would say yes. I mean, I'm an example. I would say there's many things in Islam, in the Gita, in many faiths that I would believe in as a good idea and a good philosophy and a good life philosophy to implement. But I don't believe in the theological root of how that revelation came to be. I don't believe that there was a God and he sent his angels and that message was passed on. I think that there was another way that those ideas occurred to those people as prophets, as messengers, and then they spread them to their followers. But the worth of an idea is in itself. I'm reminded of the dialogue, Plato's dialogue with Socrates, the Euthyphro. And in the Euthyphro, Socrates is challenged, I think, quite effectively by Euthyphro, saying, do we believe or do we follow something because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because which comes first? Is it that the thing is good and that's why God asks us to do it, or is the thing good because God asked us to do it? What comes first in the causality? So if we say tell the truth, and God says also tell the truth, did God endorse that because telling the truth was good even independent of God? Or is the God's blessing over an action like telling the truth? That's what gives its nobility, its correct action. And that's it. Really depends on what your belief is and how you construct your beliefs, and whether you think morality derives from a supernatural being, or whether you think morality derives from the proofs in the pudding. If the revelation of God tells us to do something that's obviously having bad effects, then we need to judge that by that, and then say, well, it's not God. Maybe people find ways around it, saying, well, God doesn't mean it like that. People reinterpret and reformulate the Bible, for example, when it comes to treatment of women, Leviticus, the encouraging slavery, encouraging sexual violence and abuse. Those are reinterpreted now by saying, well, they're not for this time. We don't hold up an objective standard of morality. We do adjust, and there has to be those. And for example, the Baha'is have reformulated. They reviewed the Islamic civilization, which was maybe correct for its time. Muhammad maybe progressed things from how women were treated before he came along, but that's not forever. There has to be a constant renewal and a revivification, as Ghazali might say. So I would say yes, it is possible to, and it is a good idea to have commonly agreed laws. Whether you may think God brought them down, I may think, well, they're kind of man-made laws, but as long as we agree on them, I think that's a good way to organize society.
Well, yes, because once you have these laws, I mean, whether God really made them or not, we have something to go on, and then we can say, oh, does murder include executions? Does murder include killing somebody
Abortion.
in the battlefield? I mean, because for every prohibition, there will be an exception. For every rule, there will be an exception. And I suppose it's just a matter of how advanced our legal system is in order to take into account, um, what should be exceptions to the rule. Such as, superficially, we might all agree that murder is a very bad thing indeed. But if you do believe in the death penalty, then you would have to believe that the executioner is doing the right thing. And if you do believe in self-defense, and an invading army is out to conquer you, then I think you would have to agree that it is necessary to kill the soldiers of the invading army in battlefield. And I suppose over the centuries, people have refined these ideas into, and have categories for them. As far as whether to, okay, I don't think we can really deny the fact that religious groups are the most powerful groups. So, um, and they outlive empires. So, we were talking about Hinduism, and Hinduism, I think, is older than all the, other religions, and somehow or other they have managed to survive, because they have scripture, they have, territory, and they have people calling themselves Hindus who claim to believe in them. So I suppose you have a kind of idea of human continuity than us just saying, oh, we're all humans, but we have no particular identity beyond, being human. We want to feel ourselves to be special, and therefore, we join groups. We say we are from this country, we are from that religion, we are um, from that family, or that class, or that, have particular political affiliations. Something in us wants to believe that we are special and have particular and unique characteristics. And for some reason, religion seems to preserve that in a very paradoxical way.
Yes, I think that that paradox, that dilemma at the heart of the human condition is there most heavily in all faith and belief groups, even in humanism, for example. We want to be one key part of humanism is critical thinking, is thinking for yourself, is not just following the herd. And I would say even Islam has that. You shouldn't just blindly follow the traditions of yesteryear and say, well, we've always done that, so we're going to carry on doing it. You can't outsource your theological processing and thinking and independent reasoning to someone else. Humanism doesn't propose that, and neither does Islam, as my understanding goes. And yet, as we said before, a lot of people don't. They do want to outsource it. They'll say, "Imam, just tell me what to do. Tell me how to live my life, and I'll do it."
Yeah, because I can't be
And
bothered to read the
I can't be
book.
bothered.
Or,
Exactly. Yeah, I
yeah,
want to go and watch the football. I want to go and whatever, relax, play with my kids and my family. I don't want to spend the time, which is perfectly fair enough. I mean, there's many people have, they although the Quran does say that and the religion has been made easy for us. And Ghazali also would say it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, it's not. We don't need to all be scholars and experts to do these things, to live what you believe is a good life. That's the main thing. Is that can you, if you believe in judgment, can you defend and can you be accountable for the decisions that you make? That's what you'll be judged on. And I really like that about Islam. It's not there's some objective standard out there. It's you. Um, God does not place that burden more than you could bear on any individual person, and He'll judge you based on your individual circumstance. I think that idea is quite liberating. You're saying, listen, I'm going to do my best. I'm not perfect. Mercy, of course, mercy is God's. I think I would say greatest attribute in the Islamic context and in those teachings. So we're not asking for perfect justice. If we're marked according to perfect justice, we'd all get Fs and we'd fail. But
yeah.
because God is merciful and He has an understanding, and we can approach Him in a humble posture, then we'll be the context. And in that situation, this is the best I could do, and so on. As long as we're not trying to game the system and try and get away with things,
Mm,
I think it can certainly work. But there's that tension between we want to form parts of an in group, but we want to be individuals. We want to be the herd of independent minds. So that tension between we want to belong, we're social animals, but on the other hand, I want to be different. I want to be amongst my group. I want to be the most respected. I want to be the standout, the star, the celebrity. That ego sort of that is in us, and I think that it's a healthy tension that can be understood and managed.
mm.
We can't deny that the ego exists, and trying to repress it would not be healthy. And on the other hand, we can't completely be afraid of compromising, living in a society, living in a tribe, and in some ways, following the leader at some point. We can't do everything ourselves. So that tension's there, and I think it's natural. And I think religions can help us understand that and live that reality and explore that tension and make it part of our life in a beautiful way, with etiquette and um, with quite a respectable and a noble way of approaching life.
Yes, I mean, I see it as a self-correcting mechanism. So we were talking about rules earlier, and I'm basically saying even if we break the rules, even if we know the rules and we break them thinking we can get away with it, um, and if bad stuff were to happen to us, then there is a chain of causation. Oops, I shouldn't have murdered so and so. I shouldn't have stolen that stuff from him. I shouldn't have done all those things I was told not to do. But because I thought I could get away with it, I did those things. And I think that's what they're for. The rules are safety rails rather than cages. Because if there are no safety rails, we might very easily wander off the edge of a cliff, or a tall, or fall off a tall building. And it's there so we know, which side of the rails we are on. And if we go over, if we walk on the wild side and bad stuff, we can, if we're still around, correct ourselves. And um, and, and I suppose that, I think, helps us avoid terrible mistakes. And uh, you're agnostic, and so am I. And I'm and I suppose I'm making the point that even an atheist who says, "Oh, religion is just for control," and I thought, yes, it is for control, because laws are for control. Because even atheists will see the point of certain laws forbidding certain undesirable behaviour. And um, and I guess the whole point of believing in the afterlife and an omnipotent God is that, if you think He's watching, then you're more likely to obey these rules from generation to generation, and avoid falling into the same error again and again, because the unlearned lessons of history can be very painful to learn again.
Yeah, if we believe that God is watching, it's a very useful tool for social control. That's true. But who decides what God says is right? Who interprets that? Who has that power of interpretation? For example, throughout history, it's mostly been men. In fact, it's most exclusively been men with the who hold the power. It's not the dervish that usually interprets things for us. It will be the imam. It will be the favored, the favored
The judiciary.
imam, or the judiciary, the religious institutions of the country, who are backed by the power. And that's also what Rumi wanted to withdraw from. People who write poetry or religious interpretations or give fatwas to please the king or to please the caliph or to please the sultan. This is not religion so even they believed in some sense a separation between church and state, because often when you have these two power centers coming together, one will be subservient towards another, or they will both have a symbiotic relationship that will end up serving each other and not, say, taqwa, not a divine civilization, as the Baha'is would call it. We're building a divine civilization that has to have that spiritual transformation, not just in the people, but in the politicians, the person who decides, our CO2 policy or our traffic policy, so on. They have to have that spiritual consciousness, that idea of, okay, let me empathize, let me actually make sure that this policy is working for people, not some kind of careerist, technocrat, bureaucrat who's, you know, trying to work his way up a corporate ladder. I think that kind of approach to government or to any organization is only short-termist, and it's going to end up in disaster sooner or later. And so
But
that
would you say atheism is a form of short termism? Because if you're an atheist, you're saying, well, my life ends, well, when I go, and after that, I don't really care. So your attitude towards resisting temptation would be more short termist than somebody who thinks, well, my life doesn't end when I die, because there will be the afterlife to consider, and my where I go in my afterlife would be dependent on, well, the creator and the judge of my actions during my lifetime.
I'm an atheist insofar as I haven't seen any evidence that an afterlife exists. And the stories that I've been told or the arguments that have been put to me have been through other people. I mean, I've not directly seen God come down or speak to me in my heart. So other people claim they have. Okay, I can't judge that. I can judge their descriptions of it, and I can judge, okay, God speaking to me, there is a God and he's chosen me, and here's these miracles I performed, or let me have this prophecy. There's other proxy ways we can use to judge whether God exists, and I've not been convinced by those. That's not means that I've closed my mind to any of them as a
I think
scientist,
it's
as
an
an empiricist.
inclination, isn't it?
Sorry?
You just choose to believe, or you choose not to believe. You make the inference that there must have been a creator because there was a creation, or you find some other
Yeah,
reason
I think
to
that that
dismiss.
logic, yeah, that logic is flawed. I don't think that it's as simple as saying that. It's as simple as saying, well, there's this pen here, so therefore this pen must have been created by some sentient being who's greater than this pen, and therefore this whole universe must have been created. It doesn't work like that. I think that it's intuitive. I can see why you say it seems commonsensical, but a lot of things can seem commonsensical but actually be wrong. So, for example, in Socrates' time or Aristotle's time, if you had a cup of hot water and you let go of it, the steam went upwards, but the cup and the water went downwards. So what he said was the steam is rising to its natural place. That's why it goes upwards in the clouds. And the cup made of clay or the water is going to its natural place because earth attracts earth and water attracts water. That seems perfectly rational. That seems perfectly commonsensical. Just like when you said this, this creation, this universe must have a sentient supernatural being that's above it and more powerful than it and must have created it. Of course, that's perfectly logical within that narrow sentence, but that doesn't mean that it's true. A lot of things can seem commonsensical, but they're not true, or at least they don't reflect reality.
Do you
That's what I
have
mean.
a counter argument to um, undermine the premise of that statement?
What statement?
And
That there's a
the one
creation.
about if there was a creation, there must have been a creator. So, I mean, a common one would be there was no creation, the universe was already
Yeah,
there, it was
that,
always
that's
there.
that's one
So, there's no
possibility.
need
Yeah,
for a creator.
that's one possibility. Yeah.
Hmm.
That the universe has always been there. It just changes the different forms, or this universe is one of many universes, and another universe sort of budded off and gave rise to this universe. There's also no, first of all, there's no guarantee that we can find out the answer. I mean, there could be things that are close to us. Just there's things that human beings are just like, for example, I'm not capable of lifting up, a lorry with my body. I have a limitation to my physical abilities. So it could be that the origin of the universe is something that we are limited in our mental capacities. That would be the equivalent of us trying to lift that lorry. So there's no guarantee that we will find it out. First of all, we have to accept that it could just be beyond us. But that doesn't mean that we stop trying. We do try. As when we try and investigate it, this is what we find. We find that the universe is um, billions of years older than these texts supposedly revealed by people who had a direct connection with God have told us. And that's a bit weird. I mean, why would there be these inconsistencies if that was a direct message? But anyway, I mean, regardless of that, but that's one possibility. Yes,
Sorry, I
the
didn't
universe is
understand
all,
this. Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't understand what you just said.
yeah.
I hope you will repeat it.
Which part? So, yes, I agree with you that one possibility as an alternative to the universe having a sentient creator is
Hmm.
that the universe has always existed. That's
Hmm.
one possibility, yeah. So it's
Hmm.
not a given that, just because this pen had a creator, the universe had to have had a creator because the pen has characteristics that the universe doesn't, and vice versa. So we can't go from apples to oranges that smoothly, even though it may seem intuitive. Um, that's number one.
Comparing pears with oranges and
Comparing pears with
yeah,
oranges,
making the
exactly. Yeah,
distinction. Okay.
exactly.
Hmm.
And we can when we and that was one point I was making. Another point was, so will we ever, can we find out that we're not, there's no law of nature, there's no certainty that we will be able to discover the answer, because there are limits to our capacities. So for example, I have a limit to my physical capacity. I can't run at 500 miles an hour. I can't lift up a lorry with my bare hands. There's a limit to what I can physically do. In the
Hmm.
same way, there could be a limit to what I can mentally do. For example, I can't I can't imagine all of the digits of infinity in my head. Similarly,
Yes.
it could be that there could be a limit in us understanding what happened before the universe. It could be that we just can't do that.
So do you accept the Big Bang? I know you're a scientist, so would it be fair to assume that you accept the Big
Yeah,
Bang
I think
theory?
that's well, science is about developing models, and utility science is not about truth. So the best model we have, the best understanding, the best theory, the best explanation we have is that yes, there was a Big Bang, there was a big expansion from a very, very concentrated form of the universe that was very homogenic to all of the vast distances we see now, and it's still expanding and expanding faster. So we just reversed that. It must have been very, very small. That seems fairly logical. And there's some evidence that we can observe through telescopes, etc., that tell us this. Yes, yeah. But what happened before the Big Bang? We have, very, very little ways of investigating that. So it could be that even after a million years of human civilization, fast forward into a million years, we may still not know. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a God. God could be
Are
one of
you
the
aware of the
possibilities.
verse in the Quran that describes the Big Bang?
Um,
I think
I'm
it's
forgetting. Yeah.
2130.
You could be right, yeah. Is it that we created you from a clot or a small? Is it that one?
No, hold on, I'll just quickly look it up in my hard copy rather than look it up. So I think it's 2130.
I think you might be right.
Yes, all the believers unaware that the heavens and the earth were but one solid mass, which we tore asunder, and that we made every living thing from water, will they not have faith? So, arguably, theists have a better idea of what caused the Big Bang than scientists, wouldn't you say?
2140 was it?
2130.
2130.
2130.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So I
No, I wouldn't say yes. I wouldn't say that. Yeah, that I realize that that's usually the one proffered to say that the Big Bang theory is captured in the Quran. I would say maybe it has ghosts, it has shadows, it has hints of it. But then, the Quran isn't the only one that has that. For example, the Hindu scriptures talk about cyclical universes that last almost trillions of years. So do we then say the Hindu scriptures are more realistic? It's I think the human imagination can be excellent, and human observation of a vast, you can observe an egg cracking and then something big coming from something quite small. Like that's not you know, that's not the achievement of science. That's the achievement of just observation and human imagination and common sense. What the achievement of science is getting the experimental results that fit the theory. Science is not competing with poetry and imagination. That's what this is. That's not the realm of science. What science is trying to do is you can propose a hypothesis, and science can help you understand whether that's right. So in that sense, science is not trying to compete with religion, or that people often try and do that. Um, it's not trying to say that the burden of science is not to say that people could never have imagined something like the Big Bang. I don't think no scientist I know would ever say that, because that's ridiculous. Human imagination is excellent at imagining things. Again, the Hindu scriptures talk about the almost like a multiverse type, expanding and shrinking
Mhm,
3,000 years before the Quran was written. So human imagination is great. I'm joining with you in celebrating human imagination and poetry.
mhm,
Again, as a student of Rumi, how could I not? But the Quran doesn't tell us how to test that, how to find that. I mean, it says one solid mass, but it wasn't a solid mass. It was plasma. So again, it's but applying scientific principles to the Quran. I'm only having to do this because someone's coming to me and saying, here's the Quran, isn't that a scientific principle? Isn't that a scientific achievement? And I would say no, it's not a scientific achievement, because science is have a theory, collect data, analyze the data, see if the results fit the theory. That's what science is. What the Quran is doing there is poetry, is literature, which is not science.
It seems to be a scientific statement because of the mention of we made water from every living thing.
Mm.
So it has the
If
appearance
you
of
say that,
a
yeah,
scientific statement, and there
if
are
you say
other
that,
scientific
mm,
statements.
if you say that if for you making a cake, you have to get some flour, you have to add some water, and it'll go through a transformation, and it'll go from something small to something big. Is that a scientific statement? I mean, it,
Yeah, I mean,
you've
yeah,
got some
because the
observation
flower,
in there.
and, you know,
Yeah, but I think
um,
somehow people seem to think that science is everything that happens, or everything that's not science. That's just observation. I mean, things happen. That the science things were happening again. Aristotle and the cup, the let go of the cup, and the cup fell down and the steam goes upwards. Is that science? I would say again. I think we really have to
oh,
understand. We
well,
spend a
I
lot of
mean,
time
it
looking
actually
at.
makes sense even on its own terms. Like, a falling object would be attracted to the ground, and so that's where it's meant to go. And something that is
Yes, I would
lighter
say that's not
than
science. Yeah,
air would
I,
naturally go up because that is part of
Of course, as I
physics
said,
as
it's
well.
completely intuitive. It's rational in that sense, as in like I can follow the logic of that statement, of that thought. It's not incoherent. It has an internal consistency to it. That's fine, but that's not science. I would say it's let's different science. The root word just means knowledge. So if you're talking about knowledge, and say here the Quran is talking about science, knowledge. It's giving you knowledge of the universe. I would say yes. If you're talking about that definition of science, yes, it has knowledge. Now, but the modern post Galileo, who you mentioned before, the Galilean definition of knowledge, or post Galileo, post Newton, is not just that. It's not just saying the cup falls to the ground, or the even if Galileo had said, listen, you guys say the sun goes around the earth, I say the earth goes around the sun. Which one is scientific? Actually, neither of them, because both of them are missing a part. Saying a statement and proposing a theory is not science, it's part of science. Again, simply observing something is part of science, but it's not science. Bringing those together is what science is. And an important word here is falsifiable, falsifiability. So making a falsifiable prediction. So, okay, so if you think that all cups will fall to the ground because the earth, the clay attracts the clay, or the earth, or whatever, okay, well, how can we falsify that? We have to devise an experiment, a theory that will allow us to see when that theory can fail, if it can fail. So, for example, we may make a cup that's made out of leaves, say, or we may make a cup that's made out of, I don't know, or if we could say, it's an anachronism, but let's go into space. Let's have a rocket and shoot these ancient Greeks into space, and we let go of the cup in space. Does it fall towards the Earth if it's actually in space? No, it doesn't. So that's an example of science. That's an example of a falsifiable theory. That's not just a theory. That's not just an observation, but it's bringing those together, and it's devising an experiment that can really test that theory and tell us how applicable it is. And then, so we can see by that, if we did that scientific experiment, we can see that Aristotle will be wrong. It's not that the cup falls to the ground because clay likes earth. It's because any object is attracted by gravity to a larger, more massive object, which is the Earth. That's why it falls to the ground. So the Quran is observing, it's describing, it's giving a story, like the Hindu scriptures did 3,000 years ago, like many other scriptures have done. It's giving very nice stories, but it's very little to do with science.
But I suppose what makes the Quran special is that it's supposed to be from God, so it's saying I, caused the
The
Big Bang
the the
to
Gita is
happen.
also from
I
God.
caused it.
Many scriptures are God claiming to speak in its own
Really,
voice.
I thought it was only the Torah and the Quran that is supposed to be from the Abrahamic God. I'm not aware of any
Oh, so no, I'm not
others.
talking about God as in even in Hindu. So, for example, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is God, is the avatar of God, and he says, I am, whatever, the beginning and end of all things. I am time or death, destroyer of worlds, etc. So other texts have also claimed that within the Abrahamic. I mean, I'm not, yeah, uh, and maybe, yeah, you use of the word I versus use of the word we and who is, yeah, that's another discussion
The
altogether.
royal we.
The royal
Um,
we.
mm.
Yeah.
But yes, I suppose in conception, it is all about, the Quran distinguishes itself from Hindu scripture by because it says it from God. Whether it's true or not, we don't know. But it's a claim, and so far it is
But I'm sorry, just to reach the point again,
unfalsifiable.
it's not distinguishing because the Gita also says it's from God. It's actually narrated by God. Is he's one of the dialogue, the participants in the dialogue. So it may differentiate itself from Hindu scriptures in other ways, but not in this way.
But it's not the Abrahamic God. I suppose that is,
Yeah, I mean, I'm
the
not sure the
difference.
Quran was aware of the Hindu God or vice versa. So, yeah. But me as as a kind of an outsider surveying these various texts as I do, I see one text here claiming, God, through Angel Gabriel spoke to this prophet, and it's his words that are being conveyed to Muhammad's followers. And I see over here a text that says, yes, this is what God spoke to this person and gave him spiritual advice. I mean, I'm not judging one over the other. I'm just taking them on at their word,
Yes,
and believe.
I suppose Jewish theology is about, making the whole thing logical. So I suppose that's one of the reasons why, idolatry is, such a big thing for them, because, the idea of whether God is immanent or transcendent is, for the Abrahamic religions, well, the Jews and the Muslims anyway, it is, well, heretical to have the wrong view.
Yeah,
It,
that's a core debate. Yeah,
mm,
in those religions, and it splits a lot of people because, and usually along the lines of mystical or literal interpretations of. So, for example, the Mu'tazilites in early Islam, they, they as you might imagine, regarded as heretics by there were others. They would say, well, if you kick a football through a window and the ball breaks the window, the window breaks not because the ball itself is acting, is that God is making the ball break the window, and God is involved in every single piece of the glass flying through the air. So God is in everything, and as the Quran says, God is aware of even a leaf stirring. So that they would say that God is completely immanent. It's really enmeshed in every minutia of this universe, this cosmos. And for other people, that's heretical. That's that almost like pantheism. You're saying the football is God, or so. A lot of it's about interpretation. And going back to Ghazali, he would say, "Do we really need to have this debate?" Yeah. The point of life is not to prove whether God is immanent or transcendent. That's not the point at all. The point of, I would say, Islam is not even to worship God. It's to live a good life, to live with taqwa, have righteous
but
conduct.
how are
So
we to live our good lives?
whatever
We,
you
then we'll
need,
have to define good and we'll have to define evil. And
exactly, exactly. And you have to define it, and I have to define it, and we will be judged by our fellow man. And if you believe there's a God, we'll be judged by God based on that. It's difficult. It's not. No one's going to do your homework for you. You have to do the homework. You have to actually use the cognoscative powers that you've been given, God given, you may say, to decide that through democracy, through consultation. Wanting a recipe book and saying, well, okay, you might as well have made me an automaton. Why don't you make me a caterpillar? Why don't you make me? No, God, if you believe in God, has made you a thinking, fallible, temptable human who can sometimes overanalyze things. But it's the beauty of the human condition that we have to go through the pains and arrive maybe at a Ghazalian condition where we say, listen, I'm going to be humble, seek God's forgiveness. I'm not perfect. The Merchant of Venice, the quality of mercy is not strained. I love
mhm.
that speech. If we were to ask, if justice be thy plea, then we would all be damned. So if you ask for perfect justice, you're going to be damned. Just act in the way that you think is correct. Learn from the prophet or learn from his teachings, whatever you want to do. Have all of the inputs, take all of the information, and live a good life in the way that you think it should be lived. If not, you'll be judged for it. That's what I think. That's what religions try and tell us. If we want someone else to do it, if we want to outsource our religious duty, our dharma, our investigative powers to find out what's good, then it's a risky business. It's a risky bet to place. You're placing your soul, your salvation, in someone else's hands,
Well,
even if that
I
someone be
suppose
a
we
Ghazali.
need to kind of ask for confirmation. Am I right about, this decision, this judgment?
Sure.
And eventually, we'll come across, who are you to tell me what to do? I don't respect your opinion because you are, X, Y, and Z. And I suppose we kind of need a hierarchy, in the sense that, we have, courts of appeal and supreme courts, to get a final answer on certain matters. And that, I suppose, is part of the hierarchy that is necessary for us to understand, um, in order to solve our problems.
But the danger is so we need some way of this God, whether it exists or not, the God giving the instructions almost telepathically to every human all the time. That's the only way to solve this, because as soon as the God gives a text, then we have humans looking at the text from different angles and interpreting it in different ways.
Mhm.
So I'm going to say, well, that's not what God intended. That's what Ghazali says that God intended. That's not what God intended. That's what Rumi says that God intended. So then, even with the religious text in a scripture, you end up in, as we have, dozens of Islamic sects, dozens of Hindu, thousands of Hindu sects,
Hmm.
dozens of Christian sects. So that's not that enterprise, that endeavor of trying to use God as some kind of, you know, judger of last resort, or the buck stops with God or God's word. That's not working very well. So I think we have to be open about it, and I accept that we have to find a way as humans, that's humanism, through consultation, through democracy, through accountability, through interreliability and interdependence, mutually assured policing of each other, and monitoring, as societies have done, for generations. We have to improve ourselves, and God helps those who help themselves.
Indeed, and I would argue that knowing what God's laws are, would bring us closer to Him, because then we would think, well, do we want to be, on the
If
right
only we
side,
had a way of
wrong
knowing what God's
side,
laws are.
what the meaning of the words mean. Sorry?
If only we had a way of knowing for sure what God's laws are and what God meant by them.
Well, there is a Quran, um, because I don't think people are
A
going
book
to the
that another
Torah,
human has
not
given to
even the
me. Yeah.
Jews are. I mean, what other source is there?
Exactly. What other source? There is that. That's why I'm that's why I'm an agnostic atheist, because Quran's great. Okay, fine. I mean, I'm not a hadith historian, or I've not done the academic training to have looked at the chain of various Qurans and seen that it's, even if I accept that not even a punctuation mark has changed, which is wrong, because we know, and Muslims accept, that the chapters have been changed over. And from what we know, historians, Quranic historians, they say that we'll never know. Again, the limits of our knowledge, limits of our capacity. Sometimes we have trouble establishing what happened just last week in a police incident or a rape or something like this. Even
Mhm.
last week, even with CCTV, even with video evidence and so on, we still misunderstand it. I don't think based on that I'm going to place any confidence in saying that there's a miracle that we know for sure that not even a punctuation mark has been changed in the Quran over the centuries, and somehow that's proof of God as defender of his revelation, and that there must be God, and so therefore we can all defer to the Quran, and therefore we can all be singing from the same hymn sheet, and therefore we can have a society that everyone follows the same rules. I think that's way too many ifs, and way too
But even if
many.
we did all agree to follow the Quran, the world over, there would be different interpretations of it in different
Exactly,
countries, and
exactly. Yeah.
but that's fine, you know. But
And we need a way of resolving those interpretations. What I'm saying is,
through the
why not
Supreme
cut out
Court.
the middle part? Just resolve things ourselves. Why go all the way around and then okay, fine, here's this revelation. Fine, we all agree on it. Oh, we all have different interpretations. So that wasn't very useful, was it? What's the point of having God's word when actually we know that humans interpret things very differently? You can read the recipe for making a cake, and I can read the recipe for making a cake, and we can both make slightly different cakes, even in a very simple step-by-step process. So whether or not we believe that there is actually a God and that the God gave us these revelations, yeah, and even if we're all on board and saying, no, I really want to understand God's revelation honestly, earnestly, in good faith, you and I can both do that and come away with different laws or different ways to implement those laws. So I don't really see the provision of a holy text and a holy book that's meant to be infallible as a labor-saving device, as it were, to try and establish the rules of society. Because I think anywhere we go, we have to end up with a bunch of humans have to decide together how to live and what rules to live by, what interpretations to live by. So why not cut out the God element?
Because the hypothetical supreme authority is necessary for us to say, you know, even when we say things like, you know, in a perfect world, you know, in an ideal scenario, we are, I think, reaching out to God when we say these things. You know, if things were working properly, you know, then such and such a thing. Um,
Sure. Yeah, it's a useful philosophical tool to have ideal scenarios, to have hypotheticals, to have thought experiments. I'm not arguing against thought experiments. I'm arguing against why do we have to believe in a revealed text that we all have to try and perfectly preserve and interpret in a synchronized way, and also by consequence believe in some kind of interdimensional supernatural being in order to, at the end of the day, arrive at a democratic consultation, jurisprudence, and law, which is what we were doing anyway. So what have we gained by having that massive loop around to go and pick up this God along the way as a hitchhiker and bring him to earth and bring him to sort of somehow make our lives easier when it's not made our lives easier?
well, I think so many of the culture wars raging across the West is about people not agreeing terms, not agreeing about the political system, not agreeing about the moral system or the interpretation of laws, and this is I think an immense cause of instability and division. And I'm not saying, you know, after we all agree on the rules, you know, everything will be perfect because you know, because rules are made to be broken and people will break those rules. But at least, you know, everybody will know, yes, these are the rules. I might not agree with those rules, but they are officially the rules of the land, the law of the land. And just by getting to this situation, um, we would reduce a lot of the division and confusion and uncertainty that I think a lot of people suffer. I mean, this is just a little idea of mine, but I mean, obviously, you know, people want, you know, their system. But I'm saying I would have thought that the Quran is the best available guide because even people who don't like Muslims or Islam cannot easily think of a better book than the Quran uh, that they'd like to propose.
Yeah,
So I
if we're
win.
saying that,
Only
yeah,
kidding.
if we're saying that we should have laws of the land that are visible, that are easily
Yes.
referenceable, and that we should all sort of sing from the same hymn sheet, of course, I think no one's saying that we shouldn't have laws of the land. Um, but that doesn't mean that they have to be a supernaturally derived revelation that needs to be the basis of the laws of the land. The Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, is not a religious document, or any other constitution of my local, you know, martial arts group or my humanist group or my chess club or whatever. Groups can have commonly
But
agreed
your
rules
chess club
without a
and
supernatural.
but
Mm.
your chess club and your martial arts club would have rules, right? I mean, because it would
Exactly.
be impossible
Yeah,
for your
yeah.
chess club to exist
I'm
without
I'm not
rules.
advocating for not having rules. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's possible. And what I'm saying is, why do we need to have, as I said, why are we, I want to go from A to B. Why are we going from A to C to D and then all the way around to B? And while we're doing that loop, we pick up this thing called God as a hitchhiker because God's going to somehow help us resolve conflicts, help us kind of be like that kind of, be the parent that says, hey, stop fighting. It's a good theory, but it's not actually happened. Islam has plenty of sects, plenty of wars. Sunnis hate Shias in many ways more than they hate polytheists or more than they hate atheists. So where are we seeing this God acting as a soothing ointment to reduce communal tensions?
Here's an analogy. I think that we have a lot of electronic equipment, and I think the tendency for most people is not to read these instruction manuals, and a lot of people maybe they don't follow the recipe, so to speak. And for some reason, we just think we know better or we prefer to do things our way. And even if it doesn't work out that well, um, people might just not want to admit it and carry on in their old way until it really, really hurts. And I think the solution, I mean, you're talking about, all these different sects in Islam. It's like they've obviously broken their own rules. I'm certainly not saying, Muslims don't break their own rules, but because there are rules, we can say, your civilization crashed and burned because you broke those rules. So, as far as the Ottoman Empire is concerned, we can just go through their history, and then, if we know the Quran, we think, oh, you broke that rule. Oh, when you broke this other rule, and the other rule, and and then you can work out where they went wrong. Just like you didn't do this thing that the recipe told you to do, and that's why I think the official handbook is so important in avoiding and solving problems.
Yes, everything you've said applies to a secular constitution and secular laws as it applies to a supernaturally derived theological state. I'm not seeing where God, as a magic ingredient, is helping reduce communal tensions or violence or division. I'm
Because
not
the
seeing that
battle
there.
has not been fought and won. It's barely
Sorry?
even begun. The battle, in in rational discourse, of course, people over the centuries have killed each other over, I don't know, territorial, political disagreements, etc. But I
And also
think,
religious ones. My God is better than your God.
well, I think people can agree that there is only one Abrahamic God and he is the most powerful being conceivable. And therefore, it would be logical if you want to worship divine beings to worship the most powerful one conceivable.
But people aren't logical. People aren't. There's been plenty of wars between Muslims and Jews, Crusades, Christians, the Abraham, because they said, well, our God is the one God, but he hates you, and you've misunderstood him. Or either saying our God is different and he's going to smash your God, or he'll say, no, our God is the same as your God, but our God says that you're not worthy, so we have to get rid of you, which just happens in the Bible, for example. So again, I'm struggling to see the evidence. If we want to say hypothetically, there's no evidence, AJ, at all. We've not even fought that battle yet. But I believe, I have faith that in this hypothetical future world where people are a bit more observant, a bit more logical, a bit more well behaved in their worship of this one God, we'll have a better
Mhm.
society. Sure, okay, I'm not a prophet, I'm not a soothsayer. You can believe that, but I don't see. I'd rather base it on evidence. So the evidence I have, for example, is something like a society like Sweden or Finland or Norway, as I said before, where they don't try and crush religion at all. They allow that as a natural thing to exist for people to give meaning to their lives, etc. But they have a clear, referenceable rule book, constitution, all of that people can clearly see and be held accountable for. You knew what the rules were, but you drove while under alcoholic, influence. Therefore, this is the punishment. That's very clear. I don't think any of that needs to have a God element in the Constitution. That's what I'm struggling to see.
Well, because if we don't use the God idea, people will be saying, "Who are you to tell me what to do? I don't believe in your, whatever your political ideology is." I'm
But
saying,
people are
as a
already
way of
doing that,
reducing
even with a God.
conflict. Hmm?
A God doesn't solve that problem, as I've explained with the Crusades, as I've explained with, you know, ISIS.
Well, okay, you're saying that the Christians appear to have won against the Muslims in the Crusades. Is that what you're saying?
What
And
it
and
went back and forth, but in the end, well,
it's still going back and forth. So the story's not yet ended.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's my point. I mean, arguably, there's some you wouldn't necessarily say that religion is completely divorced of the Israel-Palestine situation, but certainly an aspect of it is religious. And especially when people are angry, they will say, "Well, I call upon my God to strike down you, whatever, the other side." So God is certainly part of. God is not. God is not. The fact that there is a God and the same God is not helping the Palestinian, Muslims and Jews to get along better. So whereas
Because they're not
under your
actually
theory,
even talking about God. I'm so glad you mentioned the Israel Hamas war, because really it's a religious conflict, but they don't even use theology to argue anything at all. So you were saying, that in these war situations, you get, my God is better than your God, and I'm going to fight you, and if I win, then it means my God has killed your God, and this is kind of what I guess primitive tribal wars were all about. And then the Abrahamic God was created, and Christians kind of co-opted the God of Israel and turned him into Jesus, and the Muslims don't quite agree. And this ongoing conflict is well, is ongoing. So we can't with confidence say that the question has been settled, because it hasn't been settled. It's still being fought in Israel, even now as we speak,
yeah, and I would
between
say
Jews
that
and
that's an
Muslims.
example that falls on my side of the argument by saying there's a conflict, there is a God that can unify them, but mankind has proven irresponsible and completely incapable of seeing that unity. And actually, God has been used dangerously to say either option one, my God is different to your God, and we're going to defeat you, or we have the same God, but that God has told me privately to get rid of you, so I'm gonna destroy you. So those are merely two options. So there are ways in which, just because you have that God existing, your theory of that's going to somehow make people sort of bow down in reverence and hug their fellow man, kumbaya, that's not happening. And that the opposite is happening.
Yeah,
The
but they're not even
all-powerful.
using religious arguments in the
Oh, they are.
Hamas-Israel
They
war.
are. They are.
Well,
Of
no,
course they
no,
are.
I don't, because really,
The
talking about the
Amalekites,
Quran,
the
chapter
Amalekites,
7.
the Amalekites referenced by Netanyahu, for example, the biblical God gave us this land.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, but those would be, um, supported by neocon rabbis, because, really it's not in order for these rabbis to call anyone they want to exterminate Amalekites. And there will be perhaps more righteous rabbis who say,
well,
well,
first you were saying they weren't using religious
Muslims are no
arguments. I just
heights
gave an
as far as we're
example of a religious
concerned.
argument. So can we agree that they are using religious terms and arguments in trying to defeat each other, or in trying to motivate themselves to continue this war? So we can agree that they are using religion, right? It's
Yes,
not a
that they
completely
are
secular
using
war.
particular religious references, but with Jews, they're not even an organized religion, because you're going to get one rabbi saying this, and you'll find another one in, saying the opposite, and they haven't got a pope. So basically any Jew can say anything they like about their religion, and you'll never get them to agree, and they don't even have to agree, because they're basically like the leader of this hippie movement, and there is no authority that they submit to amongst themselves.
The same with
There is.
Islam. There's no
Mhm.
pope in Islam. There's no clergy. Islam is
Well, there
really
is a
about
supreme
individual.
leader of Iran, so the Shias do have a supreme leader. Um, I guess the Sunnis, they might be thrown into the dungeon by their absolute monarch in Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf kingdoms are, well, I would argue that Christianity is for absolute monarchs, but Islam is for constitutional republics. But it doesn't appear that Muslims even understand this. What I'm saying, because I don't think they follow their own rules, and I think a lot of the problems is people not following their own rules, and
I maybe think that you're in danger of the no true Scotsman fallacy here, where you say, well, there's this thing called religion. Please do believe me, and there's this way to follow it. It's just that no one's following it perfectly ever, and they're all not they're all not true Scotsmen. No true religionist would ever follow it that way. Well, and the problem with that is, I mean, you're kind of moving the goalpost where you want us to believe in this religious society and following religion, but there's a small problem that no human ever has our society has ever followed it that way. So why are we investing in something that's never worked?
well, it could work if people
If we
adopted
believe you,
a
if we believe
religion.
your story, yeah, if we believe your kind of Middle Earth, J.R.R. Tolkien, Narnia.
Well, I actually don't like Tolkien, but I'm saying
Mm.
a lot of people
But
are supposed to believe in
your
God.
fantasy, like
These
you've
Christians, these
dreamed a
Muslims.
dream, you've dreamed a great dream, and we have to kind of you know hope to
Well,
live in
there
that
are
world.
Sharia theocracies, so it's not something completely out of the blue. I think there are. Well, I think is it five theocracies in the world. So
Which, sorry, no, what I mean is which society has become less divided because of God being in the constitution, and which
well, it's
religion?
very difficult to measure. I mean, objectively, like, are they more divided now than they were before?
Mm.
I would argue that if you do have an official religion, so at least you have an official religion. But if you ask the Americans what kind of, moral system they have, they wouldn't be able to tell you what moral system they have. I mean, what are they? What are their principles? Congress just makes up the rules as they go along. We don't have a constitution. The British are supposed to have this magic, invisible, unwritten constitution. But what does it mean? It just means Parliament just makes up the rules as it goes along.
The US does have a constitution, so it is written, so that there are some core values that are there. It can be expanded, sure, but this doesn't. Again, that's not the argument. That's the argument of having a detailed written constitution, like my chess club, or my martial arts club. That's the argument for that. What I'm asking is, so, and if you're saying, on the one hand, you're saying it's difficult to measure if a society is succeeding or not succeeding in being less or more divisive. Well, that's a problem, because if your argument is, I believe that this is the problem in society today, and adding God means that there'll be less division. How do we measure that? If, as you say, you can't measure that, so are you just sort of confirmation bias? You're seeing what you want to see. That's one problem. Another problem is,
I like objective criteria, so I wouldn't be saying, oh, they're happier or less divided. I'm basically saying Iran.
but without objective
Um,
criteria, how you measure if your idea is working or not? This is again something close to science, where you have a theory. A theory is that a hypothesis that if we have a state religion and if we have a religious sort of permeation of our laws, then that will lead to a better society. Now, again, I think you're right at the start when you said we have to define what better society means. Do we mean human development index? Do we mean happiness index? Do we mean GDP? We have to define that first. And another thing we can do is look at other existing societies and look at those measures and see. And if we look at them, Sweden, Norway, Finland tend to top. Now, if you're telling me that there's some other measure that you're going to use to decide what's a better society, okay, then we can have that discussion. But
mhm.
we need to, I think, tease these out before
Yes,
we
I'm
rush to.
all for objective criteria. So I don't think measuring our success by GDP is particularly helpful because it causes a very consumerist culture, and
Sure, yeah, neither do I. I said
but
development index and happiness index as two
well
examples.
that
GDP was one of them.
that's also very I mean, how is happiness measured? Different people are made happy by different things. So
No. I think the question I was asking was, what's your criteria? I didn't say, here are some examples of criteria. Please tell me what's wrong with them. I said, how do you define when you say we're going to move from a worse situation where we are now, add God and add religious laws, and we'll be somewhere better? How will we know whether we've reached somewhere better? What's your criteria?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So basically, instead of using GDP, I would use a negative criteria. So I would measure unhappiness in the form of crime, murder, rape, theft, um,
Which we already do.
suicide, divorce, that sort
Mm,
of thing, per capita. And,
mhm.
and I think we've got a pretty good measure. I think we can all agree that it's not nice to be murdered or robbed or burgled or all these things. So I
Sure.
think that would be a very objective way of measuring um, the the well-being of a society.
Okay, and have you looked at that across religious and non-religious societies or less religious societies?
Well, I'm assuming that
Mm,
it's not looking too good for most people, but I'm particularly concerned about the West, and I think we are being told in Britain
mhm.
that we will be the victims of crime sooner or later because we live in a country of rising crime, as is the rest of the West, as we get poorer and closer to World War III, perhaps.
Hmm. And have you looked at but also the problem here is that we can't. You might say the UAE is a country that has quite a lot of religious elements in a society, and maybe there's low crime there, but then there's also other religious countries, maybe in South America, in Africa, that are religious but have quite a lot of crime, because we can't separate the political, geopolitical situations from the religious aspects of the country. On the other hand, Norway, Finland have relatively, you know, low crime as well. Same with Japan. Japan, Shinto Buddhism isn't a permeating aspect of its culture. It's quite easy to be non-religious in Japan as well, and they also have low crime. So when we talk about, again, this belief, this idea, this wish and hope, or a theory, hypothesis, that a religiously inspired society and laws will lead to less divorce and less crime. Where's the evidence for that? We don't see the evidence, because if there was, then, as I say, we both agree,
Well, people
objective
are always
evidence would be
going
clear.
back to the good old days when, crime was not quite so high and most people were not divorced, etc. So I think we already have historical evidence that there existed a time when crime was lower, taxes were lower,
Mm.
and divorce and suicide was lower.
Interesting. Why do you think that divorce and marriage is such a um, important measure of a society's health? Because
Because I assume that
Mm,
if you want to talk about society, you don't want to be living in a society that will be extinguished tomorrow or next year or in
mhm.
5 years. You want to live in what you hope is a successful society that will carry on for a bit longer. And
So fertility rate would be an important thing to measure, really, rather than marriage as like some kind of a proxy for that. Because marriage, in many ways, I mean, especially, say, I come from India, marriage there for a long time, and still is in many ways, a patriarchal endeavor. Sure, there may be very few divorces, or relatively few compared to the West, but we what are the rights of the people who are actually in that? Is the rights and the desires of the woman who may be in an arranged marriage and is actually living a very horrible life, but has no other option because she's economically bound to the husband, etc. Just because that divorce is not happening doesn't mean that the person there is happy, or that household is that household is somehow going to be a productive unit in society if they're living in, a depressive circumstance. But just by the fact that they have not got divorced doesn't mean that things are, all hunky dory underneath that roof.
Well, I mean, people's emotions, it's like, yes, they're happy one day and they're miserable the next. And maybe we don't know what's good for us. Maybe we're upset over something that turns out to be a good thing, and we're happy about something that will turn into tragedy. So I suppose the most objective criteria for somebody who isn't divorced is that that their marriage has not yet failed. So we can say that. I mean, you were talking about female oppression, but are women now in our sexually liberated society, are they necessarily happier than their mothers or grandmothers? I don't know. I think they're complaining they can't find men to marry them, etc. And men are saying they can't find a decent woman to marry, or a decent woman who will marry them. So maybe, even as so many of us think marriage is horrible, parenthood is oppressive, we're still made miserable by the idea that nobody wants to marry us and we don't have children. I mean, I think people don't really know what they want, and that is their problem. But maybe they will never know what they want. They will never know whether they made the right decision in marrying whoever. And if they did marry, I guess some people decide to accept it instead of fighting and being miserable about it. And all these thoughts go through their minds in a swirl of confusion, and they basically don't know what they think from one moment to the next anyway. So the only objective measurement of a success of a society is, well, how long they've been around. In terms of ancient civilizations like India or China or Iran, and all these ancient empires. I guess we'll just have to work out, if they're going to stand the test of time. And
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sorry, go on.
but I suppose I'm also saying that those societies that have crashed and burned, the Roman Empire comes to mind, is that something made it fail, and I'm saying, well, Christianity failed to prevent the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and it was Edward Gibbon who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that Christianity caused its fall. So Constantine's decision to Christianize Rome was perhaps wrong, but maybe we can learn something from it. Because I mean, I really do think that if Islam had been around at the time of Constantine, I think he would have grabbed that with both hands instead of trying to get Christianity to work. And I think the problem with the West is that people are making up the rules as they go along, and they don't know what they want, and um, making up the rules as they go along makes people.
Are people not doing that in Saudi Arabia? I mean, are people not doing that just because the shop front has the word Islam on it, or Islamic Republic of blah blah blah? Are they? Do we think that that's actually being observed inside of the country?
Well, no, I don't. I know people go on about Saudi Arabia, but that's just because they're in charge of Mecca. MBS is an absolute monarch, and I mean, I do. And the Saudis are terrified of being thrown into jail, and particularly the scholars who give the wrong interpretation of the Quran. And back to what we were talking about earlier, maybe the reason why Rumi and the others you mentioned, Ghazali and all the others, why did they retire from politics? Probably because they were tired of being told to distort and misinterpret
Yes,
it, the
absolutely.
obvious clear rules of the Quran, and the cognitive dissonance was too much for them, and they just
Yes.
retired into spirituality. Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah, certainly. But if we're trying to point to, again, I would say the evidence, if we're trying to point to a religious society that's not making up the rules as it goes along, I see quite, I see quite the opposite. I mean, it's a lot of Afghanistan under the Taliban, India under Hinduism. I think power is kind of the same everywhere. The concentration of power and the temptation is too much. Even if you're meant to be living in a country that's meant to be following Quranic rules, you will distort, you will reinterpret things to suit yourself, to get yourself more power, more luxury, more freedom, accrue more things to yourself, and just beggar thy neighbor. I think that's a human, kind of universal.
Which
We
is
see
why
that everywhere.
the interpretation of the rules is so important, and who
But that's failed.
gets
That's
to
failed.
have the final
Yeah.
word on the
You're,
interpretation.
if we introduce again this hitchhiker, or this sort of this hanger on of a supernatural deity into the equation, if we're arriving at building a new society, sort of de novo, like Tarzan, or Robinson Crusoe, we start from nothing, but we have in that society this omnipotent, unimpeachable God and power. You're giving the tool in the hand of people who can manipulate others to say, well, actually, I spoke to God today and he told me that, you're kicked off the island. So, whereas if we
Yeah,
say
but
no,
the Quran doesn't have that, because it's got all these, rules that gives people certain rights and all that, and so
that's
does the
fine,
American
but they're not
Constitution.
being followed.
Yeah,
You're,
yeah, because of
the Saudi Arabia is a perfect example, and Afghanistan is
yeah,
another
and
example,
America too,
Uzbekistan.
from what they've done to Trump. So I would say that obviously it upsets people if they think the people in charge, their ruling classes, are corrupt and incompetent. And I think it's the cognitive dissonance element that
Yes, I
tells us
agree.
we are not living the good life,
But
and we do
uh,
not enjoy government,
show me
good
the
government.
example where the religious society or religiously inspired constitutions or laws have stopped that from happening, or have reduced the corruption and reduced the self-interestedness of the politicians.
Well, I can only tell you what
Uzbekistan,
I know through
Kazakhstan.
how, through living in the West, and I've noticed,
Yeah,
a certain, um,
I would suggest we need to go to people who actually live in these societies, like Saudi Arabia, like India,
yeah, well,
like
we already know
Pakistan,
that nobody's, holding up Saudi Arabia as the
or Pakistan, or
paragon of
Uzbekistan,
Islamic
or
virtue.
Kazakhstan, or
Now, I
we can
think
pick anyone,
Iran must
Indonesia
be the one,
or
because
Iran.
it's a most powerful Islamic republic. Whether you like it or not, it's an
Hmm.
ancient civilization, and it's
Okay,
the
so
only country capable of defying
we're
America.
using Iran as an example of a religious society, religiously inspired society, that whose leaders are less corrupt, relatively speaking, or qualitatively. Maybe you can't measure it quantitatively, but there's a qualitative way we can point to and say, aha, there's a situation where in the West there would be corrupt, they'd be taking advantage of each other, they'd be hypocritical, they'd be, giving favors to their mates and so on. But in that religious society, they're not doing that. Is that the claim? Or they're doing that less?
I don't. Okay, I don't live in Iran, but obviously I'm taking an interest in
Mm.
what's going on, and I think we can objectively agree that Iran um, is sufficiently self-confident to defy America, but by the attitude it's taken towards Israel. And we also know that before the 1979 Iranian Revolution, it was under the Shah, and the Shah was only a puppet of of the West. So there is a qualitative difference in status from before the Iranian Revolution to after the Iranian Revolution. So if you're going to say, what has Islam done for the Iranians? It has given them national sovereignty and the ability to have an independent foreign policy. So I think that is reasonably objective.
But there's other countries that have achieved that without religion. So I'm just trying to focus on
Oh, you mean
things that you said.
China?
So
Do you mean
corruption.
China?
Yes, yes, China's one example. and many, like, South Africa, other republics that have achieved independence without using religion. Um, but, but going back to your criteria of, say, crime, corruption, divorce, like, fraud and things like this, political scandals. So with, if that was the measure initially, now we're shifting on to, well, religion's kind of given Iran more of a backbone and more of a spine on the international stage. Well, I think that's neither here nor there, because that wasn't the criteria that we were measuring. And
Well, it would have a bearing on the what's the word, self-esteem of ordinary Iranians.
okay, but why was that? I mean, that we're trying to tease out unique contributions that religion makes to societies. Revolutions are not unique religious contributions. Okay, it was a religious revolution, but not everyone who was part of it was religious, as in was an Islamist, as it say. The Islamists were leading, and they had to make several promises, which they then subsequently betrayed and broke many of them. For example, regarding women's rights, so they had to lie, they had to twist, they had to do some machinations behind the scenes to get into power. And once they got into power, they've completely. I mean, are they following Islamic laws now? Um, my Iranian friends would say, not in many ways. And they have their interpretation of Islamic laws, but in terms of, treatment of minorities, treatment of Baha'is, for example, treatment of other religions, foreigners in their country, it's the death penalty, imprisonment without charge, lack of appeal, lack of access to lawyers. These are things that, okay, they may not have been detailed in the Quran, but they're commonly agreed on as universal human rights, and they're not being provided there. No, I'm not saying that Islam or Iran is some kind of a failed civilization. Also, I can't possibly say that coming from the West, because people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. But I'm trying to see what the I'm trying to get some kind of a real world example where the religious element in a society is, on the whole, helping bring about unity, helping development, and reducing suffering. The religious element of society. I can't really. I would say, if you're going to ask me to try and kind of steelman the argument, I would say the UAE probably is the best example. But they're quite unique societies. They have quite a monoculture population, usually quite small populations, large natural resources, and they're quite insulated in many ways. They don't really have a much of a multicultural population to contend with, as, say, for example, Germany does, or France does, or the UK does, because that brings more problem. You have to get more people to agree. Whereas in a monoculture like Japan, for example, like the UAE, usually it's a lot easier to manage. Now, you can say that we can't confuse correlation with causation just because they have a lot of natural wealth, they're a relatively small population, they have quite a monoculture, and also they're religious. We don't know which of these is contributing to the lack of crime, the better quality of life, etc., etc. We have to be able to tease out examples where it's the religion and only the religion that's contributing to these things. That's why I'm trying to really give a concrete example and trying to focus on that. So I think
A lot of Muslims I speak to say the Gulf kingdoms are fake countries,
in many ways they
carved
are,
out
yeah.
of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and therefore these rulers do not have any legitimacy, and and Western policy is really about keeping the Gulf kingdoms well fed and in luxury, and the policy of keeping the Shias in Iran and the Yemen starving and sanctioned. So, but I mean, okay, irrespective of geopolitics, I mean, the idea is that Iran, okay, the Iranians got their country back, through Islam, and you may think this is a good
Was
or
it
bad
was it
thing.
through Islam? I'm not sure that it was. Islam was there, it was present, but it wasn't through Islam.
Well, it did become a theocracy after the 1979
Okay, but
revolution, didn't it?
is that correlation or is that causation?
I would say it was causation.
So if the Islamists hadn't been there, or if the Islamic element, but what about Islam led to that revolution that couldn't have been there if the Islam wasn't there?
Well, revolutions need a big idea, right? I mean, it can't be, oh, I'm just going to fix your, I don't know, speed limit or something. It has to be, some
Hmm.
holistic idea, which is why,
So, for example, the Chinese Revolution, or the Cuban Revolution, or the Egyptian Revolution that got rid of, King Faisal. Um, these are examples of revolutions that were quite secular. So we can see that revolutions. So the theory, the hypothesis that revolutions are religiously guided or are somehow uniquely religiously guided. You may say, yeah, you may say, in Iran's example, there was an example of where religion played a key role. We could, it's, I think it's certainly key, but I wouldn't say it's kind of indispensable role. I think a revolution probably would have happened regardless. Um, and there are definitely examples of where it's happened without religion. So again, I'm at a loss to find where this unique contribution of religion is to a better society. I'm struggling to find that because all I can see is, yes, religion has been involved in some good things, but those achievements have been achieved without an overt religious character. So it can be achieved without an overt religious character. Why are we investing so much in a religious future as somehow that
right,
wins things over?
you're saying Islam and communism have had the same revolutionary consequence for the countries who adopted them, and why is one one system better than the other? Is that your question? I'm just to be
Not
clear.
quite, not quite. No, my understanding of your position is that societies would be better off if they introduced a religious permeation into their laws, into their, cultural norms, whatever, if they were theocracies, basically. Is that have I understood
Yes,
that right?
yes, I
Yeah,
would be
yeah,
saying that,
yeah,
and
yeah.
while fiercely protecting religious freedom, because I'm saying there is a verse in the Quran that is in harmony with the
Sure.
First Amendment, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Islam is in any case an imperial
Hmm.
religion. It's always talking about how to deal with the Jews and the Christians and the idolaters. So, it immediately talks about non-Muslims. So
Hmm.
and has principles about dealing with them.
Yeah.
So for
Which
that
Iran
reason, I
doesn't really
call it an
follow, I
imperial
would say.
religion. The West is already an empire, and I'm saying if it were to adopt an imperial religion that is better than Christianity, it would have a better run empire, a better run global empire.
Yes, so that where has that shown to be effective? Because
Well, I'm
I'm
just making a
uniquely,
prediction. So,
yeah,
obviously, it hasn't happened yet, so
sure,
I can't
prediction,
prove
but
it to
you
you.
have to
I
base
can
it
only
on,
point to Iran and say, well, at least the Iranians have their independent foreign policy when, they couldn't before under the Shah, who was a Western puppet. And then you're going to talk about um, communism. Um, I mean, actually, in the case of China, I would say that in many ways the Chinese are being unconsciously Islamic, in their one party state, in their consultation, which is the principle of Shura, and but still trying to be strict about, marriage and family values. But I think increasingly they are. Lowering standards because of demographic pressures, etc.
yeah, I think if we start introducing the concept of unconsciously Islamic, then the concept of Islamic suddenly becomes very wide and we can apply it to anything and everything. Of course, the Islamic civilization and Islamic revelations have a lot in common with many other societies. Just because a society has one thing in common with Islamic society, are we then going to then abrogate that as part of the supporting your argument? Because that seems like confirmation bias here. Again, I'm struggling to see where the unique an identifiable, isolatable contribution of an Islamic society is. I understand that it's your proposition, it's your theory, it's in this hypothetical world in future, that's your belief. But the problem is that there's no evidence for it, and there's
Well,
no evidence.
I can only point to Iran and say that for the Iranians, they used Islam to get their country back. And I think
I'll be
this.
interested to see if any which Iranians agree with that actually, rather than us. I mean, I'm not an expert in Iran, but are there Iranian commentators, ideally non-Muslim or atheist commentators, because that would lend more weight to the argument rather
Well, the
than self-centered.
non-Muslims one would be living in the West, and
No. I'm saying I'm trying to support your argument by saying if you actually found an Iranian living in the West or Iranian atheist or whatever who supports your argument and says, actually, in my reading of the history, Islam was the reason why the revolution succeeded. I'll be interested to see that rather than us just making the claim here and just sort of saying, in a pop history way, oh yes, it was an Islamic revolution, and it couldn't have happened without Islam. I'd like to actually see some expert opinion on that, because from my understanding of it, it's not the case at all. It's that they were able to galvanize a certain proportion of the population, and they used religion as a tool. But really, the Shah was, there was plenty wrong there, and for example, female equality and things like this. So they had to get on board many secular, trade unions and all of that. It wasn't just some kind of a mass cry of, we want more Islam. Actually, Islam had to do a lot of deals saying, "Oh, we'll curb the Islam. It's all right. We won't impose it too much." And then they imposed it very harshly. So they had to play a very clever game. But I'd like to see some expert opinion on that rather than us.
I'll see if I can. You look for some, and I'll look for some, and we can maybe meet and talk about it again the next time, if you like. Thank you so much for coming and giving up your Friday evening. It's been a great pleasure, and I think we're having a very, very wide-ranging discussion from Rumi to Ghazali to Islamic revolutions, etc. So thank you again for coming, Alibari.
Oh, please call me AJ. All my friends do, and the pleasure was all mine. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, AJ.